So for people that aren't familiar with your story, David, you are an ex-international arms dealer, and you were portrayed by Miles Teller in the movie War Dogs.
The fortunate yet unfortunate thing, war is very profitable. He opens up his computer and he logs into his Bank of America account and he has $1.8 million. That was the first time I thought, man, this could be serious, and he's doing some seriously messed up things. And Costa, his biggest mistake was he called up the local Albanian press and told them that the Albanian prime minister was getting kickbacks from this deal. And then about a week or two after that article came out, he was found dead. Every crisis is an opportunity for somebody.
So for people that aren't familiar with your story, David, you are an ex-international arms dealer.
Emphasis on the X.
Emphasis on the X, thank you. And you were portrayed by Miles Teller in the movie War Dogs.
Yes.
Which came out in 2016 with Jonah Hill.
Yeah.
Great movie, highly recommend it. But again, it's about you and your partner who won this massive $300 million contract, government contract to arm the Afghan National Army.
Yes.
And kind of how it blows up in your face in the process.
Yeah.
So yeah, I watched the movie in 2016 and I loved it. And then I saw you on a podcast. You were giving an interview, I think, like a couple years after. And it's not that, Miles Teller, or it's not that they painted you to be like a dummy in the movie or anything, but like, I don't know why I was shocked to see that you're just very well spoken and articulate and well versed on like geopolitics and obviously the military industrial complex.
Well, thank you.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And there's so much more to the story, man, that was kind of left on the cutting room floor, whether it be crazy things that happen or corruption or just funny things and your personal anecdotes, which I really enjoyed. So yeah, man, I've been looking forward to it and I've been excited to get into the full story here today. So thank you for coming out here. Seriously.
Yeah, my pleasure. My pleasure.
So let's just start at the beginning, because I know that you met Efraim and Alex when you guys were kids. So where'd you grow up?
So I grew up in Miami Beach. Well, I moved to Miami when I was 8 years old. I was born in the United States in St. Louis, but moved when I was a baby to Israel. My dad was a rabbi, an Orthodox rabbi, and so for his work, we moved to Israel. And then when I was 8 years old, we moved to Miami. So since I was 8 years old, been living mostly in Miami. Alex, I met in third grade because that was the first year I was here, and we were in the same class. And Efraim I met a little bit later because he wasn't in my school. He was also part of an Orthodox Jewish family, but he went to a different Jewish school, the only other one in town. And we met when I was about 15, 16, and he was about like 11, 12. He's 4 years younger than me.
What kind of stuff did you like to do as a kid?
What kind of stuff did I like to do as a kid? You mean like when I was like 16 or when I was like
Yeah, I guess when you were a little kid, maybe.
When I was a little kid?
Yeah.
I loved to read. I was always very into sci-fi. I guess it was kind of like my escape. Or for people who don't know, Orthodox Judaism is pretty intense. It's very, very isolationist, and they fully subscribe to the idea that you should protect your children from exposure to outside influences. So, I wasn't allowed to like listen to non-Jewish music. I wasn't allowed to watch most movies. Even Disney movies that were rated G, my mother had to watch them first before she allowed the children to watch it. And so we weren't allowed to watch The Little Mermaid because she was just dressed too immodestly. Those seashells, they look too sexy. So, yeah, my mother did not allow us to watch Little Mermaid.
Oh, man. So what was Efraim like as a kid?
Efraim was, he was always a joker. He loved to play pranks on people. So I first got to know him when he was about 11, 12, and I was about 15, 16. We both our families both went to the same synagogue. And neither of us liked to pray, as most of the kids didn't, because Orthodox prayers are unpleasant. It's very, very ritualistic, right? So you have to read from a prayer book in Hebrew, and you have to say this at this time, and then stand up for this part, and sit down for that part, and bow down for that part, and then the leader of the prayer says this, and you say that, and it's a whole thing, and it's the same thing every day. And you have to go to synagogue 3 times a day to pray. And so, yeah, it gets old. And I mean, unless you're really into it, which obviously I wasn't. And so we would sneak out during prayers and go hang out like on the basketball courts. And Ephraim loved to play pranks on people. He was always joking around. And Orthodox men have to wear a yarmulke, right? Which, the cap. And officially, you're not supposed to like walk more than like 4 steps without it. So if it falls, you have to like cover your head, while you. And so he would love to like sneak up behind like older guys and like steal it from them and go running off, cackling like a maniac. And they would get really. It's very disrespectful, obviously. And so they would run after him and chase him and grab it back and beat him up a bit. And he would beg for forgiveness. And then as soon as they would walk away, he would run up behind them and do it again. So he was really fearless, and he just loved to play pranks on people. I think my favorite prank he played at that time was on Sabbath. Once he snuck into the synagogue and turned off the lights. And the rule is that you're not allowed to turn lights on and off on the Sabbath, right? So no one in the synagogue was allowed to turn the lights back on. And they had to go get the janitor who was not Jewish to go turn the lights back on while everyone was like trying to pray in the dark. But the rule is that you can't ask the non-Jewish person directly to break the Sabbath for you. It's like you have to hint it at them. So they're like, oh, it would be really nice if the lights were really on right now. It's very difficult to pray. And like eventually, the guy barely spoke English. Eventually, they kind of hinted at it enough so he understood that he should turn the lights on. But that was... I think that was probably his most notorious prank at the time. Yeah,
a menace from a young age. Huh?
Yeah, he really was. I mean, he just loved to mess with people. It's like he loved to know that he was getting in people's heads and like really getting under their skin. He really enjoyed that. Yeah.
Yeah, I'm sure we'll get into some of that.
Yeah.
But so, at what point do you move to Miami and start the massage therapy thing?
So after I graduated high school, I went to Israel for 2 years. My parents wanted me to study Judaism and to become more religious because I was going off the path, as they called it. I was becoming less and less religious. And I went to Israel. I studied, what they wanted me to study. And then I went to college and I took a general anthropology course, and I realized that everything I had studied about religion was more or less contradicted by science. And so that was kind of the final nail in the coffin of my religiosity. So I was studying chemistry at the time I was in university, and I realized that I needed to make money while I was in university because my parents weren't going to pay for me. And my friends were all working in like doing minimum wage jobs, like flipping burgers, being a waiter, and I realized that that massage therapy, you can make like $75 an hour doing this. So I originally was actually inspired to be a massage therapist. While I was in Israel, I was with a girl who I really liked, right? And nothing ended up happening. I had zero skills back then. I didn't actually talk to a girl who wasn't related to me until I was like 17 years old. They keep the sexes separate, so like I went to an all-boys school, and we studied from like early in the morning until late at night, mostly Bible and Bible-related things. But they keep you busy so that you don't get into non-religiously approved activities, and and so and you don't really interact with anyone of the opposite sex because they go to a different school and you're not like hanging out with people. So yeah, I had zero skills. But while I was in Israel, I like met this girl. I really liked her, and we went to a music festival. And there was a tent there at the festival where the local massage school was giving out like free 10-minute massages. And so, all of our friends, like me, the girl, and all the people we were with, we all got massages. It was free, right? And after, it was amazing. It was the first professional massage I'd ever gotten, and it was incredible. But afterwards, I remember I was with the girl, and she like was in a daze, and she goes, "Oh my God, that was so amazing. Any guy I'm with needs to know how to give good massages. And right then I swore to myself, I am going to learn how to give amazing massages. And so it was always in the back of my head. And then when I was in university and I realized, man, I really need to make some money here, I realized, massage therapy, you can get paid like $75, $80, $85 an hour plus tips sometimes. And that's way more than my friends are making being waiters or flipping burgers. I could make, with one massage more money than my friends are making an entire day worth of work. So I went to massage school. That I did a intensive massage course, which took me about 6 months to complete, and got licensed. People don't know this, but you actually have to get licensed by the state to be a massage therapist. And then I realized, I was in University of Florida, which is in Gainesville. I realized that there's not going to be many massage clients in Gainesville, which is a very small college town. So I decided to stay in Miami and continue my university studies in Miami. And then I got into some other businesses while I was doing that. I bought a digital camera and realized I needed an SD card for the digital. This is back when digital cameras were new, and SD cards were super expensive. And I wanted to get a better deal, so I started looking around for better deals on the SD cards. And I found someone who was selling it in bulk. And I realized, well, I could sell the rest of them on eBay. So I bought like 100 of them and sold the rest of them on eBay. And then I realized, well, I could buy more and continue selling it on eBay. And that became a pretty good business for me. And then a friend of mine asked me, a friend of mine who I'd known from Israel told me, hey, I know you're selling these SD cards and you got like good sources. I'm actually in the bedsheet business and in bed sheets and towels because he was selling to nursing homes and hospitals. He said, well, I'm currently buying from distributors in the United States, but I know they're all getting it from overseas. So if you can get a connection overseas and get me a better price, I'll be happy to buy from you. So I did my research and found some manufacturers in Pakistan that had amazing prices and started importing bed sheets and towels into the United States to sell to him. It wasn't like in the movie where I took like delivery of a whole bunch of boxes of bed sheets and it was filling up my apartment. I was just brokering. I didn't even buy it before I sold it. So pretty much I'd get an order, a letter of credit, which is kind of like an escrow instrument from the bank where the buyer puts the money into like an escrow account. And then I just transferred that to the seller and collected the profit. And that was it. It just went directly from the manufacturer to the seller. And so I was doing that and doing pretty well. I was pretty comfortable, still studying chemistry. And that's when I bumped into Efraim. We were both at Alex's house, actually, at our mutual friend Alex Podrisky's house. And we were both just hanging out, smoking weed. And I hadn't seen him in a few years because he had been shipped off to LA to work for his uncle when he was 16 years old. He had gotten kicked out of his private Jewish high school that he was going to because they caught him smoking weed. Which his mother blamed on me for some reason. His mother blamed all his problems on all his friends, and my mother blamed him, and everyone's. It was never their own son, their own angel son's fault. It's
that David Packouz.
Exactly. It's always the bad influence in your kid's life. It's never your kid that's the problem, right? So. So yeah, he was caught smoking weed by his school. They kicked him out, and his parents said, "Well, if you're not going to take your schooling seriously, you're not going to take the rules seriously. You're gonna find out what real life is like. You're going to join the workforce." And they sent him to his uncle, his mother's brother, to work in LA. His uncle owned this big pawn shop in South Central LA. And he first put him to work in the warehouse, and eventually he started doing sales inside the pawn shop. And as a 16-year-old boy, he just got obsessed with guns. He was, some guys are car guys, some guys are guitar guys, and some guys are gun guys. Exactly, And he was very, very firmly in the gun guy camp. And so he got obsessed with guns. He really enjoyed selling it to the customers. He's got to know, the industry really well. He started buying and selling guns online, like on the gun boards. He started recognizing when something was undervalued, where he could buy it and sell it for more somewhere else. And so he started doing that all under his uncle's name because he was 16 years old. And so he was doing that. And then his uncle was bidding on contracts to sell to the local and state police. So his uncle loved to like be buddy with the local cops, and the local cops would always come into the shop. This is stories that he told me. I wasn't there, but he told me that the local cops would love to come into the shop, and his uncle would schmooze with them, and he'd offer them really good deals on like handguns or ammo or bulletproof vests and stuff. And then that's how he got into bidding on government contracts, because for officially supplied items, the government needs to go through the official procurement process, which means that they need to post what they want to buy on their website, and then it's open bid competition for anyone who wants to supply this, gives their best price, and then they pick the best price. And that way they ensure that they're getting the best deal for the taxpayer who's footing the bill. And so his uncle started bidding on state and local police contracts, and Efraim got into that whole process and learned how to do the government contracting bidding process from his uncle. They worked together for about 2 years, and then he had a falling out with his uncle. Efraim claims his uncle screwed him out of like $70,000, and of course his uncle claims that Efraim screwed him out of $70,000. They're both very well known in the industry for screwing everybody, so either could be right, both could be right. I believe them both when they say the other's a scumbag, because they're both right. Yeah, so when he had that falling out with his uncle, and then he moved back to Miami and when he was about 18, and he took over a corporate structure, a corporation that his dad had incorporated like years before, called AEY Inc. His dad wasn't using it for anything. I think he had incorporated it originally to use as a label printing business, but never actually did anything with it. AEY was named after his 3 sons, his dad's 3 sons. So Efraim is the E in AEY. So it's Avrami, Efraim, Yeshaya. That's the AEY. In the movie, he's like, it stands for nothing. No, it actually,
get the fuck out.
Yeah. He did act like that, but not in that specific case. But yeah, it's so it does stand for the initials of him and his 2 brothers. And he registered AEY Inc. with the federal government, started bidding on federal contracts. This was in 2004, so right after the invasion of Iraq, which happened in 2003. And after the United States pretty much bombed Saddam Hussein and destroyed his military, the idea was to go into Iraq and to build up a democratic government. And part of building up a functional democracy is creating a police force, creating an army. And so they had to supply the new Iraqi police force and army with weapons and ammunition and bulletproof vests and boots and helmets and all that stuff. And so, but the Iraqis, they are used to Soviet-style weapons like the AK-47, and which the United States doesn't really manufacture in any real quantity. So the government had to put up for bid all these Soviet-style weapons, and that gave the opportunity for a middleman like Efraim to get in on these contracts. And so he was already pretty well versed in the industry, and he knew where to get sources of supply for the various things the government was looking for. And so he started bidding on these contracts, and he started winning them and started doing pretty well. And after about a year of him working on his own in 2005 is when I bumped into him, and he told me what he was doing, and he asked me what I was doing. And so I told him about the bedsheet business and the SD cards, and he goes to me, he's like, a lot of the stuff you're doing is very similar skills that I use in my work too. Finding suppliers, arranging logistics, figuring out licensing, arranging the financing, etc. And but he's like, but I bet I'm making way more money than you. And I'm like, really? How much money are you making? And he goes to me, he's like, I'm gonna tell you, but just to inspire you, not because I'm bragging, okay? Because I want to inspire you because I think that we can work together. I think that you can come and make a lot more money working with me. So I'm gonna tell you. He opens up his computer and he logs into his Bank of America account, and he shows me his Bank of America account, and he has $1.8 million of cash in the bank, and he was 18 years old. And I knew that his parents didn't. I know his family, so I know his parents didn't give him that money. His parents weren't rich. His grandfather is a billionaire, but his mother's father. But his grandfather's one of those billionaires who gives nothing to anybody. So I knew it didn't come from his family. So I knew he had made that money. And I realized, holy crap. I mean, I was doing pretty good at that point. At that point, I think I had saved up about $100,000, which is pretty good for a 23-year-old, legitimately.
Yeah.
Yeah. To make a legitimate business. I thought I was kind of hot shit. I'm like, I had way more money than most of my friends. But then this guy comes around and he has $1.8 million in the bank, and he made it in 1 year. And I was like, holy crap, he knows something I don't know. Maybe I could learn something. And so I said, sure, let's do this. I'm in. Let's get into this. And that's how I started on my fateful journey down government contracting and arms dealing.
Wow. And so, excuse me, as far as the contracting process, you kind of started to cover it, but if people are thinking basically what we're getting to is two kids won this massive contract, and people probably think how the hell is that possible? And isn't it because the way the government's procurement process works, and as you said before, everything's posted online, wasn't this as a result of right after the Iraq war kicked off, Halliburton and Dick Cheney's company won these massive no-bid contracts?
Yeah.
And wasn't this a response from the Bush administration to make terms more favorable to small businesses and that kind of thing? Can you explain that?
Yeah. So there was big in 2004, 2005. There were several scandals that happened because for people who don't remember, George Bush was the president back then, and his vice president was Dick Cheney. Dick Cheney, before he became vice president of the United States, was CEO of a company called Halliburton, which is a huge multi-billion-dollar publicly traded company that provides mostly oil services to oil companies. And when the United States went into Iraq and took it over, Halliburton got a few multi-billion-dollar contracts with the federal government that they didn't even compete for. It was a no-bid contract, they called it. Now, it should not happen because the way the government procurement system is set up, it's set up to be a competition of who can give the lowest price to the government. But they just ended up giving it to Halliburton without any competition, and that created a big scandal. Especially since Dick Cheney was the former CEO and now he's the vice president, and coincidentally they now get these enormous multi-billion-dollar contracts, and so that created a big political scandal. And so there were already some what they call set-asides for small business, right? A set-aside in government contracting is where they reserve certain types of contracts for certain specific businesses. So, for example, small business set aside is you have to be a business under a certain size in order to be eligible to win this contract. So they have a certain amount of money that's has to go towards small businesses, and they set it up this way so that the federal government is supporting small businesses with federal contracting. They already had some small business set-asides before that, but because of the whole Halliburton scandal, they significantly increased the percentage of money that had to be was earmarked towards small business set-asides. There are other set-asides as well. There's for women-owned business, veteran-owned business, disabled veteran-owned business, economically disadvantaged location business. So, like if your business in certain specific areas that are considered economically disadvantaged, then you can get certain contracts that other people cannot. It's a way for them to support businesses in areas of the country that are not doing that great, right? At least it is what it's supposed to be in theory. So there are a lot of different set-asides and advantages that someone who knows the government contracting system well can get a leg up, can get an advantage over the competition by going for this. And of course, Efraim was very good at seeing every loophole, every potential way that he could get an advantage in the system. He was very, very good at that.
Mm. And so everything has to be posted online and
Yes.
publicly put up for bid.
Yes.
And that's how you guys came to bid on your contracts.
Yeah.
But I guess I was going to say, is there any? There definitely is. So maybe which like entities don't have to abide by that? Like I'm sure like maybe the CIA's got a
Yes.
black budget or
They
Joint
do.
Special Operations Command.
Right.
Like what kind of organizations don't have to play by those rules?
So as far as I know, the CIA, the CIA does have a black budget. I don't know the size of it, but it's quite big. It's in the multi-billions. If I could be wrong here, but I think it's somewhere around 8-9 billion. I don't know offhand. Quite a few $1 billion that they can use secretly for who knows what. So yeah, the CIA does have a black budget. As far as I'm aware, the vast majority of government spending is required to be posted on the website. So for anyone who wants to check it out, it's sam.gov, sam.gov. So you could see all the things that the government is buying and what prices they paid for it. In the award notices, you see what the winning bid was, and you could see quite interesting things. I mean, like I remember while I was bidding on contracts, I saw some requests for quote for certain services for like a military base in Chad, right, which is a African country, and I'd never even seen Chad in the news at all, and then like 2 months later, it came out that the United States was doing some anti-terror operations there. And I'm like, oh yeah, I remember. So this is what they were preparing for. They were building up the soldiers in that base so that they could do this operation. And so a smart journalist or intelligence officer can look at the contracts that the United States is spending on and kind of get some sort of idea of where the activity is.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Huh. So how did it start with Efraim after that? What was like the arrangement that you guys had?
So we started out with that our agreement was that I would go for contracts that he wasn't going for. So I would go for brand new contracts and do all the work, meaning I would find all the suppliers, all the logistics companies and arrangements and everything, and pretty much put everything together until it was ready for submission to the government. I would put that together, and then Efraim would review that, and then he would get on the phone and use his significant negotiating skills to get all the suppliers to knock them down a few points and to lower their prices a bit. And he would make sure that the submission followed the rules of what you had, the format that you had to submit it to the government. And then once we would win the contract, assuming we would win the contract, he would finance the contract, meaning he would pay for the goods or services to the supplier, and then until the point where we would get paid by the government. So the way the government works is that they pay you 30 days after you deliver. So if they want to buy, AK-47s or bullets or whatever, then you have to, usually, depending on the supplier, you have to pay the supplier in advance. and you have to pay the logistics company in advance. Then you have to wait 30 days until you receive the money from the government. So you need to be able to finance that. So he did the financing, and of course everything was under his company's name, and we would split it 50-50. That was our arrangement.
And I've heard you say that he was a very good negotiator and also renegotiator. That's an important point.
Yeah.
But and just the fact that he's very like persuasive.
Yeah.
Overall. But so what were some of the ways that he would like squeeze himself into deals?
So he had a few different ways of what he called squeezing into deals, which in his opinion were deals that he could squeeze money out of that he probably shouldn't be involved in, right? So I think the most notorious situation he got into was there was a I think it was night vision scopes where it was there was a contract, a bid out, the solicitation from the government wanting to buy certain like night vision scopes. And it was a specific brand. They wanted a specific brand. They weren't going to accept like a different kind of brand. And that the company that made those scopes, they had an established dealer network, right? And that company also was used to bidding directly to the government. So they told their dealer network, don't bid on this. We're going to bid it to the government because this is what, why should we give anyone else a profit margin? We're the only ones who make this, right? So what Efraim does, he knows that they're going to bid it to the government, right? Because he's seen the history of the government's purchases of this, and they have to list who's the winning bidder, right, and what price they paid. So he knows that they're going to bid it directly. So what he does is he calls up the company and he says, "Hey, I need a price for this amount of scopes." And what he does is he changes the quantity so it's a little bit higher, so it doesn't look like it's the same contract, right? And he tells them, it's going to, one of our allies is, it's going to Jordan or whoever it was. Yeah, I forgot who he said it was going to, but someone that it was legal to sell to because these are like high level night vision scopes. They're regulated. But the point was that he was saying it's going out of the country. Right? And he says, and you guys got to give me a good price because their other options are Chinese-made scopes. So that's who you're competing against. So you need to give me the absolute best price because they really care about the price. And so they quoted him a really good price, a better price than they were quoting the government. And because they figured, hey, we're competing against Chinese-made scopes, we better be very competitive on the price. With the government, they know they're the only ones who make it. They know their dealer network isn't bidding on it because their dealer network has to do what they tell them, right? But so they figured they're the only ones bidding on the government contract. So they gave themselves a nice, healthy profit margin there. So what he does is he goes and he underbids them. Because it's an open bid, right? Anyone can bid on this contract. It's not a sole source contract where only the manufacturer could bid on it. And so he goes and he underbids them and he wins the contract. And he pisses obviously they're furious because they were expecting to win this contract. And and then they refuse to sell him the scopes. And so he tells the government, he's like, hey, this company here they're trying to crush small business. They're doing unfair. They gave me this quote and now they're reneging on the quote and they're just trying to put me out of business. Would you be willing to accept this other brand of scope? And I'll even give you a small discount on it. And he gets them to agree. He gives them the Chinese scopes, right? And it's a way lower. He makes a massive profit margin because it was way cheaper to buy those other scopes. So yeah. Now it didn't always work. That kind of became one of his methods of kind of squeezing into deals. Mm-hmm. Sometimes the government would be like, no, we need these specific brand scopes or these specific brand whatever. I don't remember whether he actually on the scope thing whether they accepted it or not, but he had won contracts in that way before. There were other contracts where they're like, no, we're not going to do it. You have to give us this or nothing. And he defaulted on like five contracts, or either 5 or 7 contracts in total because of that, because he tried to pull these sneaky kind of substitution games. And the contracting officer was like, no, we're not going to accept that. You quoted us this, you have to give us that. But he was very good and very convincing on the phone to try to get them to change their minds, but it didn't always work. But sometimes it worked, and when it did work, he made a massive amount of money.
Right. Well, it's a bait and switch.
That's exactly what it is.
It's called equivalent product, right?
Yes, exactly.
Okay. Yeah, because like I was telling you before,
Yeah.
I read a little bit of his book, and I guess he did that once with Knight's Armament rifles, which is a really nice rifle. It's like a $3,000 rifle.
Right.
I think it was the SR-25, like their precision rifle, and he subbed it out for like a DPMS, which is like less than half the price.
Right.
And again, I remember hearing he did that with like the 249 saw, the belt-fed machine
he
gun.
made a lot of money on that.
Yeah, and
one.
switched them out for like some Korean guns, which is pretty fucked up because
K3,
you know this is going to American soldiers.
Yeah.
And like again, like you said, I'm shocked to hear that clause even exists because like in a lot of cases, like you're looking for a specific product, and like even if it is equivalent on paper, like I wouldn't want that.
No, I mean there's a reason they ask for that specific product because that's what they want. And and sometimes they go for it and sometimes they don't. But he was very good at like manipulating, giving them really good reasons to go for it. You know, like he would say, he would give a whole story about why it's not his fault and why it's the big bad company that's trying to crush small businesses' fault, and how, this other equivalent product is just as good, and he's going to give them a discount so that they could save the taxpayer money. And, he gave them a whole story and a whole thing of how they could justify it to change it to a different product. And sometimes it worked and sometimes it didn't. But yeah, when it worked, like with the 249s, he made I think he made like $1 million on that. Yeah, on that. I remember him doing that deal. Yeah, with the K3s.
Yeah, the Korean machine guns, right?
Yeah.
That's wild.
Yeah.
And didn't he also used to like call competitors and pretend to be like a contracting officer?
He would do that. He would do that quite often. The thing that really blew my mind is that, what he would do is he would call up someone who he knew was bidding on the contract that he was bidding on, and he would pretend to be the contracting officer. This is actually, they have this scene in the movie, where in the beginning, and Jonah Hill is doing this, and this actually happened. I've seen him do this a whole bunch of times. He would pretend to be the contracting officer, tell them that, like, their computer system is down, they need to get their price over the phone because they're coming up on the deadline, and so he would get the price that his competitor is bidding it at, and then he could underbid them. So that's how he would get their secret information. But the thing that really blew my mind about him, how when he would do that he would use his cell phone to make these phone calls, and he wouldn't block his number either. He would just call them up, and nobody ever caught him, which always blew my mind. I think because most of the places he was calling up were using landlines, so they weren't even they didn't even have caller ID. But I mean, they could have easily just done a *69 or whatever and checked it out who was calling them, but they just didn't. I think they just assumed that nobody would have the chutzpah, as they call it, the audacity to do something so sneaky and, I would imagine, illegal.
Yeah, I would imagine too.
Yeah.
And we were talking a little bit downstairs about just how Efraim was way crazier in real life than they made him out to be in the movie, and they made him out to be pretty crazy in the movie.
Yeah.
So, what comes to mind when you think about some of the crazy things that he did?
So, well, I will say with the caveat, one thing he didn't do was fire a automatic machine gun in the middle of the city. He never did that. So he wasn't that crazy. Okay. We did have machine guns in the trunk of the car because we had the federal firearms license, so we were licensed to have them. And we would sometimes go to the range and with Uzis, and everyone else is popping off handguns, and suddenly you hear, and suddenly everyone else goes quiet, and everyone goes, "What is that?" So that was fun, but he never actually fired it over an ounce of weed or anything like that. But he was much bigger of a dick in real life. I think they toned him down to make him more likable, right? So he would also do crazy stuff for example, in the movie, he's when he's trying to pick up the girl, and he gets punched out by Dan Blazarian for hitting on this girl, right? So I would actually see him do worse stuff than that. Like I would go out with him, and he would go up to like a couple that's hanging out, holding hands at like the bar, and he would go up to the girl, on the opposite side, and pick up her other hand and say, "Come on, baby, you should hang out with me. You're too good for this guy." And he would get into fights, and I'd have to like pull him out. "Oh, he's so drunk. I'm so sorry." Pull him out. I'm like, "Efraim, you fucking asshole," And he would do this all the time. So it was like really, really annoying. He got into a lot of fights, but like just from being an asshole. Like he'd get like really wasted, and like in like while we're in like a cab, he'd like go behind the cab driver and like put his hands over the guy's eyes. He's like, "Keep driving, motherfucker, keep driving. I'll give you $100. I'll give you $100 if you drive for another 10 seconds. Like I'm like, "What the fuck are you doing? Like you're gonna kill us." Yeah, I mean, he was just like, he was nuts.
And so what was the first deal that you guys did together, or tried to do? Was the Xbox deal?
Yeah, so the Xbox deal was kind of how we got into business in the beginning. And it wasn't government contracting. It was so when he first tried to convince me to get into government contracting, and he showed me his bank account. At first, I was like, I had this was right when the first original Xbox came out, and it was a huge hit. It was very popular, and it was sold out in practically every major retailer at the time. And so through some of my connections for the SD cards, I had gotten some offers to buy some Xboxes. And it was sold out everywhere. And they were offering me, I think it was something like 2,000 Xboxes or 1,000. I forgot the exact numbers, but it was more money than I had. I needed a lot more money to buy these Xboxes. And so I told Efraim, I knew he had money because he had shown me his bank account. I'm like, "Hey, Efraim, I've got this amazing deal for Xboxes. Why don't we get in on this together? You could fund it, and we could, split the money." And so he calls up the guy who's doing the Xboxes. It turns out that guy's just a middleman, and he manages to use his charm and skills to convince the guy to introduce us to his source. Right? He convinces him he's going to sign a non-circumvention, non-disclosure agreement. He's going to get his share of the pie. Of course, he leaves all sorts of loopholes open for him to wiggle out of that agreement at a later point. I mean, I didn't know this at the time, but that's how he worked. And so the guy, he introduces us to his source, and then it turns out that guy's a middleman, and he goes up the chain of command like 5 different levels. And each time he goes up to, gets introduced to the middleman's source, the minimum buy requirement goes up until I think by the time we got to what seemed to be the original source, we needed something like $20 million to buy, I think it was 10,000 Xboxes. So I think that came out to about like $200 an Xbox, but we thought that these guys were legitimate because it was actually a pretty big electronics parts distribution company, and they were willing to take a letter of credit for payment terms, which means that they wouldn't get paid until after we do an inspection of the goods. So there was no way they could really scam us. But Efraim only had about $2 million, and we needed 20. So we started scrambling, looking for investors. We actually got on the phone with a hedge fund from New York, and I'll remember this. I remember this phone call. Efraim, gets a phone call with like the main partners of the hedge fund, and he tells them, he's like, "Gentlemen, I need $20 million, and I'm 18 short. You guys in?" And so they were very interested in it, but they eventually declined because they said it just didn't pass the smell test. Like, why are so many Xboxes being sold to this random guy? Why isn't it being sold through the official distribution channels of Microsoft, which is where it should be? And they were probably right in the sense that it was nowadays, when I think about it, it probably was like a production overrun. So Chinese factories, particularly back then, are still known for it now, but a lot less so than back then. What they would do is when you would come to them and you want to manufacture a product, instead of making 1 million pieces like you ordered, if they think it's going to be a popular product, they may make 1.1 million and then keep that last 100,000 and try to sell it like on eBay or through other channels, which they're not allowed to do. I mean, they're pretty much stealing the IP. But Chinese companies were notorious for doing this kind of thing. And so we thought maybe the Xboxes were real, but they weren't allowed to be doing this. So it was kind of like a gray-ish market type of deal. And if they got caught, if it could have gotten impounded at customs, which that would have been the end of the hedge fund's $18 million. So that's probably why they decided not to end up funding it. Probably a smart move on their part. And probably smart move for Efraim too, because he would have lost his $2 million. That's if they had gotten caught at the border. But we had already gotten Walmart and Target to agree to buy it from us before we had even purchased it, because they were so desperate for Xboxes. They were willing to buy it at the price that they were selling it at. So they were willing to buy it to make no money on they were willing to buy it at like $400 a piece, because they were going to use it as what they call a loss leader to get people into the store. Since everybody was out of stock, if you know that your local Target has Xboxes and you want an Xbox, that's the only place to get it, you're going to go get that Xbox, and while you're there, you might buy a game or a controller or something else. And so to get the foot traffic in the door, they were willing to pay the retail sale price. So we were set to make $20 million on this one deal. And then, of course, it fell through because we couldn't fund it. So, yeah, so after that whole thing fell through, Efraim goes to me, he's like, we almost got really rich really quick right there, but it didn't happen. So why don't we go and do the business that I know? We're going to do my bread and butter. We'll do government contracting. I've been doing this for a few years, been doing really well. Why don't you come and work with me and we'll do the government contracting thing together? And so at first he was like, I'm already specializing in weapons and ammunition. Why don't you specialize in a different industry so that we could expand the business? So I decided to go after fuel contracts, because fuel is an enormous industry. It's many, many billions, hundreds of billions of dollars constantly being spent on it. It's also a fungible good, which means one fuel is the same as the other fuel. So it's usually you don't have to worry about quality issues. And if you can get into that market, it's a constant need. They never run out of the need for fuel. So I started going after fuel contracts, and that was the first contract I won. It was for 80,000 gallons of propane. Yeah, that went to the Air Force Base in Wyoming. So that was my first contract. I ended up making my 50% profit margin on it was $8,000. And I only worked on it like 2 to 3 weeks, so that was pretty good. That was pretty good for a first contract. And it was in government contracting at the time, it was anything under $100,000 in value. You don't have to have past performance, so you don't have to prove to the government that you've done this kind of business, so you could win it as a beginner. These days, they raised it up to $250,000, so you could win a $250,000 contract nowadays with zero experience, as long as you're registered properly with the government and you submit the bid in the required format and you have the best price. You're gonna win the bid, and of course, assuming you deliver on it, then you'll make the money. Yeah.
So what did you think of like the business at the time? Because like you're coming into it fresh. Ephraim's an 18-year-old kid. He's got almost $2 million in the bank. You almost get filthy rich off this first Xbox deal.
Yeah.
You do your first fuel deal. You're making money. Like, what were you thinking to yourself? You're like, this is easy. Like, what was your outlook on it?
So I realized it wasn't easy, right? Because I was pretty lucky winning a contract relatively early on. I think maybe like within the first 2 months, I won that first contract. So that was pretty good. But I realized that because it's a bidding system, most people are going to lose, because usually you have more than one, usually you have more than two bidders. So the majority of people who are bidding on any one contract are going to lose that contract. So it's definitely not an easy business. I would not say it's an easy business. And you have to be ready to deal with a lot of disappointment, because you can work very hard to submit a bid, to gather all the information and go make sure you're dotting your I's and crossing your T's as far as the paperwork that you're submitting to the government. And then most likely you're going to lose. So you have to have a lot of staying power to be in that business. And I realized that it's a difficult business, but I had the example that Efraim was doing really, really well, so I knew it was possible to make a lot of money. And so I was pretty inspired to work really hard, and I was obviously very disappointed that we didn't get filthy rich right off the Xbox deal right in the beginning, but I knew that government contracting could make millions of dollars if you do it properly, if you work it and don't give up on it, because Efraim had already done it. So I figured if I learn what he knows and do what he does, I'll make millions of dollars. Now, I didn't realize at the time that a lot of the things he was doing I probably shouldn't be doing, but there are legitimate ways of making millions and millions of dollars in government contracting, and most people do. Most people in the business are doing it legitimately. He just liked to have every sneaky advantage that he could. Some of them legal, some of them possibly not, some of them definitely not. So it definitely ranged. And the more I worked with him, the more nervous I got about his methods and the way he was doing things. But I just told myself, well, just stick it out. Just don't do yourself the things that concern you the most about what he's doing. And you'll be fine. And then maybe, you'll make a few $1 million, and then you can quit and you'll be set for life, and you don't have to worry about dealing with this guy. Because he was a very difficult person to work with. He was constantly stressed. Like, he lived off the stress. So he was always, yelling and screaming and calling me up at 3 a.m. You got to get to the office. We got to do this right now. No fucking time to waste. Like he would I remember when he first saw the solicitation for the Afghan contract, the one that ended up winning us the $300 million contract. I was on my way to have dinner with my girlfriend at the time, the one who's played by Ana de Armas in the movie, and doesn't look like her. in case you're wondering, she actually looks a lot like Halle Berry. So she looks like a different Hollywood star. She's a very good-looking woman, but nothing like Ana de Armas. She doesn't look like her. I was on my way to have dinner with her, and Efraim calls me up, and he's like, "You got to get to the office right now." And I'm like, "Dude, I'm about to have dinner with my girlfriend." He's like, "Fuck your girlfriend. You got to ditch her. You got to come to the office and work on this right now." I'm like, "Dude, I can't fucking, we already made plans. We're like, I'm like on the way to pick her up, and he's like, "Let me tell you something, David. When you're making millions of dollars, she'll be sucking your dick. She'll be so happy that you ditched her tonight. You just gotta ditch her. You gotta ditch her. This is how business is done. Do you care about money or do you care about bitches? You can't have both." So yeah, I mean, he was just like a pain. I didn't cancel I was like, yeah, we'll talk about this tomorrow. But I realized I'm like, "Oh, tell me what it is. What is it?" He's like, "Well, I just saw this massive solicitation. It just came out. We have to start working on this." I'm like, "When's the submission deadline?" "In a month and a half." "Okay, then we'll talk about it tomorrow, you fucking asshole." I mean, like, why are you like telling me to cancel my dinner plans right now? He's like, no, you don't understand. This thing is huge. This is huge. I'm like, yeah, and it'll be there tomorrow. We'll talk about it tomorrow. And it was there tomorrow, and we ended up winning it, even though I didn't cancel my dinner plans.
He was excited, David.
He was very excited. No, look.
I'm kidding.
Yeah, I mean, I talk a lot of shit about Efraim, and I will continue talking a lot of shit about Efraim because he deserves it. But I have good things to say about him too. And one of the good things that I will say about Efraim is that he worked his ass off. He had had the most intense work ethic I'd ever seen. Now, as part of that work ethic, right, he screwed everybody he came in contact with and left a trail of tears, myself included. So I wouldn't say it was I use the term ethic just as far as the amount of work he was willing to put into something. It wasn't, he wasn't definitely not ethical, but yeah, he was a very, very hard worker, and that's definitely something I admired about him, is that he really, really worked. And I would say to the point where it was not healthy, and because everyone needs some work-life balance, and he had zero work-life balance. I mean, he literally, the second he woke up, he was like looking at the government website, and he would work until he would fall asleep. He would take work calls while he was having sex with his girlfriend. I'm not even kidding. Like, he would brag about it. He's like, yeah, I was banging my girlfriend and I got a call from the contracting officer and I told her, you keep sucking, baby. This is important. This is important. This is how I'm earning our, you want to go to that nice restaurant tomorrow night? This is how it happens, baby. You just keep on doing what you're doing and I'll keep on doing what I'm doing, all right? And of course she hates it, but what can I say?
That's not shocking to me.
Yeah, she hates it. Yeah. He was just, that's just how he was. And yeah.
So at what point do you guys meet Henry, and who's he?
So Henry Gerard, actually Henry Gerard is his name in the movie.
Oh, right.
Yeah, so even I'm confusing it now. His real name was Henry Thomet. Henry is his real name, or his real name was actually Heinrich, but we called him Henry. He was from Switzerland. He was a Swiss guy. And he was introduced to us by Ralph. So Ralph was our investor. So when Efraim first got into into federal contracting, and he won his first contract, he needed a financier. He didn't have the money to finance it. So his dad introduced him to a guy that he had done business with. His dad was also in the government contracting business, though he didn't do like anything, he didn't do like any gun related stuff. He was mostly doing clothing and boots and things like that. So his dad introduced him to a guy that he had done business with, a guy named Ralph Merrill. Ralph Merrill was in the movie, he's portrayed by this Jewish laundromat owner, right? In real life, he was a Mormon machine gun factory owner, so a little more relevant, and based in Utah. He didn't even live in Miami. So his dad knew Ralph from some business they had done together, and he introduced Ralph to Efraim. And Ralph funded his first contract, and that first contract went really well, and Ralph made his money, and Ralph was really happy, and so he was happy to continue funding Ephraim's contracts. And when Efraim started winning contracts for Warsaw Pact, like ammunition and weapons, that was Henry's specialty. So Ralph introduced him to Henry to get quotes for that kind of stuff. Ralph and Henry knew each other. I don't know how they met, but they had known each other for years before that. They had done business. I think the first big deal if I recall correctly, the first big deal they had done was buying, I think it was AK-47s from South Africa. And there was this was like in the early 90s, I think, while the apartheid regime was still happening, and there was some sort of embargo against South Africa, so it was illegal to import weapons to buy from South Africa. But officially, according to the ATF, only the receiver is the weapon, right? So what they did was they chopped up all the guns, removed the receiver, and shipped all the other pieces from South Africa to the United States, which they could import legally. And then Ralph, in his factory, just manufactured the receiver. And so they were able to put all the guns together at a way lower price than any of the competitors, and they made a lot of money together that way. So that was their first deal that they had done together. So they'd been doing business for a little while. And so when Efraim started bidding on the government contracts and started winning these contracts, Ralph introduced him to Henry, and that's how they met. We met for the first time in Vegas, actually. It was at a trade show called the SHOT Show. Which is more commercial shooting sports oriented. It's not really defense oriented like they show in the movie. In the movie, they call it Vegas X, right? And that's like, they portray it like a defense type of exhibition. Really what they're trying to portray in the movie was a show that we went to called Eurosatori, which was based in Paris, and that's all about the defense industry. But I think they thought that Paris was too classy for like arms dealers. They wanted Vegas was like more, kind of like it had more that arms dealer vibe. So they changed locations in the movie and made it. They made the defense exhibition in Vegas. But we did meet Henry for the first time in Vegas at the SHOT Show.
And I heard you say in a different podcast that when you guys were at SHOT Show and you met him, you heard some rumors about him there. And then I won't say who it was, but then the host cut you off, so we didn't get to hear what the rumors were. But do you remember what you're talking about?
So Amnesty International did file, I think, a report on him, right, where they say they suspect him of supplying some warlords, dictators in Africa with weapons and ammunition. Now, I don't think they had proof of it. I don't know exactly where they got their information from, but it never rose to the level. He was never charged with anything. So he was never put on an official blacklist. He was just put on a list of concern by Amnesty International. So those were the rumors that we heard, but it was still legal for us to do business with them.
Okay. And what about, so he was, I guess, a founding partner, if he's not still a partner, at B&T or Brugger and Thomet.
Correct.
And
he's the Thomet and Brugger.
There you
Thomet.
go.
Yeah.
And so I don't remember where I saw it, but in 2019, the Army bought a bunch of submachine guns from B&T, and they're a pretty popular brand now. So is he like no longer with the company?
Yeah, he's not with them. At least not on paper. I mean, maybe he is, but they managed to hide it really well. But as far as the company is concerned, that Brugger bought out Thomet. So now, it's just his name on it, and he does not own. At least that's what B&T says.
Yeah.
What's really happening? Who knows? Yeah.
Yeah, not your concern, I guess.
And it's not mine, no.
Yeah.
That's the government's concern.
Yeah. Yeah. So I guess just on that point, before we get into the Afghan contract, did you ever have any, because Efraim did deals with not just the Pentagon, right? Or not just the U.S. government, with a bunch of different entities internationally. Mm-hmm. Did you ever have any like moral qualms with any of the deals that he did, or were any of them a little too gray for comfort?
Right. Yeah, I mean, the first time that I realized this guy is really willing to do anything, and I should be pretty concerned about it, it was about like 2 months in, when I was working on the fuel stuff, and we would work out of his apartment. Right, he didn't have an office. We'd just work in his living room. He had like a big desk, and we'd be on opposite ends of the desk, stacks of papers everywhere, and because he liked printing everything out. He would print out the solicitation, which could be like 30, 40 pages, and then he'd write on it, various, information that he thought was important. So he had stacks of each like stack was a different deal he was working on. So he had like stacks everywhere, and it got pretty messy at a certain point. And so I remember I was working on some fuel contract, and he was like talking on the phone, and he got really excited, and he's like, man, I just got a call. I got a call from one of my contacts. They want me to supply the King of Nepal with heavy machine guns and attack helicopters and riot gear, because he's got like a whole bunch of pro-democracy protests going on right over there, and he needs to take care of this. And I'm like, so he's like, oh, we're going to put together a Save the King package. And I'm like, a Save the King package? I'm like, Efraim, are you sure that that's legal? Because that sounds like it's not legal. It sounds like the State Department would not approve of your Save the King package. And I'm like, and even if it is legal, that's really fucked up. I mean, I can't, that's pretty messed up. But I'm pretty sure it's illegal. So you should probably look into that. And he goes to me, he's like, don't worry about this, bro. You just keep on working on your fuel contracts, all right? You leave this to me. And I'm like, oh my God, So when he said that, I was like, this guy can get me in a lot of trouble, and can get me into a situation where I probably shouldn't be in. And that was the first time I thought, man, this could be serious, and he's doing some seriously messed up things, and I could get pulled into it. But I convinced myself, I'm like, you know what? I will just work on my fuel contracts. I'm not going to work on that deal that he's doing there. It's not I mean, not my responsibility. I'm not working on that. I'm not going to make money off that. I'll work on my propane and my oil contracts and make my money that way. And so that was my first indication that there can be really shady areas, both legally and morally, in doing business with them. Luckily, he complained to me uh, like a week or two later. He's like, it sucks. Peace broke out in Nepal. So his Save the King package got canceled.
Oh.
Yeah, peace broke out. That was the way he put it. But yeah, he was very disappointed. But yeah, so luckily he didn't actually complete that deal.
Yeah, that's good, I would say.
Yeah.
So let's take a quick break, and then when we get back, we'll get into the Afghan contract.
Sure.
Life takes a toll on your body, and one of the first places you feel it is your back. Maybe you tried swapping out your mattress thinking that's the solution. And sure, a good mattress helps, but something I didn't realize is that your bed frame may actually be the problem. So there's an Australian startup called Sleeping Duck. They're founded by aerospace engineers, and they ran some stress tests on beds, and they found something surprising. They discovered that even with good mattresses, the bed frames, which are usually made out of flimsy, lightweight materials, often sag, completely compromising your support. So what they did is they engineered a bed called the Indestruct bed. And they built its core with over 110 pounds of structural grade steel, and they put steel beams under the backs of the sleeper. It's so much more supportive on the back that it became a bestseller in Australia, and now it's finally here in the States. So I really encourage you guys to check it out. Every part is precision engineered, and it comes with sleek designs to fit your space as well. So try it out for yourself. It comes with a 100-day trial. Head over to sleepingduck.com and give it a look. Back to the show. So the Afghan contract.
Yes.
$300 million contract. And I don't know if it still is, but it was at the time one of the largest small arms contracts in the history of the world, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
So can you just talk about kind of how or why rather the Bush administration put this solicitation out and sort of what it is that they were looking for?
Sure. So in 2000, this was like mid 2006 that they started working on this. It was coming towards the end of Bush's second term, and he was super unpopular at the time. And so the Bush administration figured that the next president would most likely be a Democrat, and which they were right about. Obama won the next election, but they thought that that the Democrats were all at least publicly anti-war. So they figured that the Democrats might pull out of Afghanistan as soon as they gain power, which they were wrong about because it took until I think it was 2020 for Biden to pull out. So the plan was that they would arm the Afghans for the next few decades, so that even if a Democratic administration pulled out of Afghanistan, that the Afghans wouldn't run out of ammunition or weapons, so that they could continue fighting the Taliban and all the other Islamic Jihad and all that all the terrorist groups that were springing up in Afghanistan. And the United States saw this as a national security issue because Al Qaeda had a base in Afghanistan, which is why we went in there in the first place. And they figured if America left, all those extremist groups would pop back up again and create training bases, et cetera. So it was important for the United States that what we perceive to be a democratically elected and stable government remain in control. Of course, that lasted, I think, like 3 days after the United States ended up leaving. So that didn't end up going well. But of course, nobody predicted it would fall that fast. So the Bush administration's plan was to arm the Afghans for as long as possible. So they put together this contract to have pretty much enough munitions so that they wouldn't run out for like decades. And at first, they just went directly to the Russians and asked them to supply it because the Russians were the only single entity that could supply everything. And I saw there was a journalist who covered this and interviewed some of the Russians who were involved in this, and they said at first they thought that there was like a typo on the request because they thought it was like one or two zeros too many because they were asking for such large quantities, and they thought it was a joke, and so they ignored the State Department, and then the State Department had to call them up and say, no, we're serious about this. We want to buy this much. And so then the Russians got really excited because they're going to make a lot of money. Then, shortly after that, before they struck a deal, the Russians supplied Iran with some nuclear technology. And because they did that, Russia was placed on a blacklist, and it became illegal for the U.S. government to buy military hardware from Russia because of that. And so they weren't able to buy it from the Russians anymore, but they also didn't want to have like 50 different suppliers. So they decided to do a single contract, and they left it open for any open bidder, which meant the only person who could bid on it was a middleman because there wasn't a single source of supply who could supply everything like the Russians could. So they put out this bid, right, for this. I think it was like 30 different items. It was everything from handgun ammunition to the AK-47 ammo, 7.62x39, machine gun, all the way up to grenades and mortar rounds and tank rounds and even anti-aircraft rockets. So it was all munitions. It wasn't weapons, but it pretty much ran the gamut of everything from small to large. And it was and there were like massive numbers, like 150 million rounds of AK-47 ammo. I think it was something like 1.1 million grenades. It was enormous numbers. And they put it out there, and we realized that we could technically qualify to bid on this contract, because the way it works is when you have a contract these days, if you have a contract above $250,000 worth, you need what they call past performance, which is proof that you've done this kind of business before. So, and they're not going to entrust a massive contract to someone that has zero experience. So, and you don't just need past performance in anything, you need in the specific thing that they're asking you to contract for. So because we had delivered on much smaller quantities, similar types of munitions to Iraq, we technically had the past performance to bid on this much, much larger contract. So of course, we had to go for it. We didn't think we were going to win because it was like 20 to 30 times bigger than anything AEY had won before. But we realized we technically qualified for it, so we might as well put in a bid. And Efraim, he told me, he's like, look, I know that our deal is 50-50, right? That you've been doing for all your other contracts. However, this contract, this is my bread and butter, right? This is ammo. I have a lot of experience in ammo. I already have 5 suppliers that are really, really good that can probably supply a good chunk of this. But I need you to go and find all the other suppliers out there, because who knows who else is out there. And if we're going to have a good chance at winning this, we need to be super competitive. We need to have pretty much every source of supply that there is. And he's like, but because this is my bread and butter, so we're going to work out a deal. It's not fair 50-50 like your fuel contracts. We'll do 25-75. And I said, $300 million contract. I mean, I didn't know it was going to be $300 million at the time. I just knew it was going to be very, very big. I said, that's fine. I'm not greedy. I'm okay with that. And so we agreed to that, 25-75. I started working on finding all the other sources of supply. He said, go find everybody except for these 5 guys, right? These 5 companies that I'm already talking to. So I went on Google. I searched for every source of supply for this type of munitions as there was. I went on the trade directories to see what companies were out there. I asked for referrals from everybody I talked to refer me to somebody who might have a good source of supply if they didn't. So, and I spent about 2 months of really, really long days and nights scouring the internet and the world for these types of items. And it was a real pain in the butt to get these kind of quotes because most of the suppliers are Eastern European companies, and they're kind of like a throwback to the Soviet era. where they don't really have a sense of customer service, right? They, when you call them up, you're kind of bothering them, you're making them work more, right? And they'd rather just be smoking cigarettes on their lunch break than giving you a quote, right? Because that's the culture in the Soviet era. You got no benefit from doing your job well as long as you showed up to work, right? It didn't really matter how well or badly you did your job. So it was a real pain to deal with them, and a lot of them they didn't even have email addresses. You had to fax them, and then half the time the fax machine would break down in the middle of the fax, and you have to call them up to make sure they got the fax, and you have to refax it to them, and very few of them spoke English, so they had to get someone in the one guy in the company who spoke a tiny bit of English, so I could confirm they got the fax, and it was a whole thing. But eventually, I got really, really good sources of supply for a lot of the items. And some of our most profitable items, like the grenades, turned out to be from some companies that I found. And we had a really competitive bid. And we put it all together in a big spreadsheet, because it's not just the price that you're getting from your suppliers. It also matters where the suppliers are, because where they are has to do with how much it's going to cost you to ship it from where it is to where it needs to go. And you have to calculate the shipping costs as well as the buy cost, and put it all together and figure out what the best possible combination of suppliers are. After about a few months of work, we had a pretty solid, what we thought was pretty competitive. And we put all the paperwork together. It was a massive amount of paperwork. And it was, of course, Efraim liked to do everything right up to the deadline. Like he really, I don't know, like maybe he got off on the adrenaline or something, but he could never do things early. He always had to be almost missing the deadline. So it was like the last day that we could submit the bid, and we had to submit it in paper form, right? For some reason, usually you email it in, but for here, they wanted us to print out everything and mail, and they even asked us for a CD, which had like the digital spreadsheets on it. We couldn't email it to them. They had to have it on a physical CD. And so we had to go to the post office to ship this stuff, and it was like 4:30, and the post office was going to close at 5. And Efraim still hadn't decided what profit margin he was going to put on the contract. And he's like, oh man, everyone is probably putting 10% on this, so maybe I should put 9% on this, just so we undercut them. But what if someone else is thinking that the same thoughts I'm having? Maybe we should put 8% to undercut them. But what are the chances that someone is really going to do that? And he kept on going back and forth. And I told him, Efraim, it doesn't matter what price we're going to miss the deadline, and then we're going to have zero. So just make a decision. Let's print out the final paperwork and get to the post office. Like 15 minutes before the post office, he's like, fine. Let's do this. We're going 9%. Prints it out. Puts the final signatures. We put it in the envelope. We get in his car, and he's like driving like 70 miles an hour down like residential roads where like the speed limit is 30. And like we finally get to the post office, and they're like literally about to lock the door, and Efraim busts past the guy, like knocks him back. I gotta get through. Very important, issues of national security. And the guy's like, oh, you fucking asshole! I was about to lock up. And he's like, oh, this is very important. This is U.S. government paperwork. And like the post office was like, fine, give it to us. We'll ship it for you. And like literally by like 3 seconds, he made it. And we mailed it in, and then we didn't like hear anything from them for like months. And we're like, okay, we definitely lost this contract because we hadn't heard. It was like 3-4 months, and then they contact us, and they say, we've been looking at your bid, and there's a few things that you may want to correct on it. We think that you quoted us a price for like the 82 millimeter mortar shells. You gave us the same price for year 1 and year 2. And are you sure that you can supply year 2 at this price? And the truth was that Efraim knew he couldn't supply year 2 on that price. He was undercutting it, with the thought that no one could supply that massive amount of shells at that price, but he was gonna say he could, so that, yeah, maybe he won't be able to on the second year supply it at that price. But by that point, he'll already have made like $150 million in deliveries. So who cares, right? So but they realized that there aren't enough shells in the world to supply enough surplus shells in the world to supply that amount of shells at that price. So they kind of came back to him and gave him the option to modify the bid. And we thought, well, it's a good thing they gave us the option rather than called bullshit on us, because otherwise they could have just rejected our offer. And so changed the bid, resubmit it. A week later, they're like, okay, we need to do several audits on you before we award this contract. And that's when we knew we were like in the final running, because they don't do audits unless you're like in the top like 2-3 people under consideration. We're like, holy crap, we might actually win this thing. And so they did I think it was like 4 or 5 different audits where they do some digging to verify the information that you submitted in the bid. So they had a supplier audit where they asked us to list all our suppliers, where we were going to get each item on the list that we quoted. And they had a transportation audit. We had to tell them what transportation companies we were going to use, what was our plan as far as transporting everything over there. They had a financial audit. We had to tell them how much money we had in the bank in order to finance this thing, and what deals we had with our bank to finance it. And they had an accounting audit where we had to show them that we had an accounting system set up to keep track of such a large contract. Now the thing is, we didn't have an accounting system set up. Efraim never did any accounting. He just ran everything by the seat of his pants. So he didn't have any accounting system. So he had to hire a forensic accountant to create one from scratch and to analyze all his past deals and create all the paperwork to show that he had done all those deals in the past with the proper accounting system. So it looked like he had a rock solid accounting system in place the whole time, which he did not. And so, yeah, he hired like a forensic accountant. It took the guy like a week and a half, 2 weeks to create everything from scratch. He also did a few shady shenanigans with the financial audit. Like he claimed that that there was that Ralph. He worked with Ralph. Ralph owned like a piece of property in, I think it was in Utah or Colorado, which he was using as like he was planning on selling it as a ski resort. They did the classic thing where they greatly inflated the value of the property and claimed it could be used as collateral, even though they knew that value probably would never happen in real life. They also did one paper. They also had a past performance audit where they want to see like all the the deals that you've done that can show that you've done this kind of business. And one deal Efraim put on there was a deal that him and Ralph were planning on doing, but never actually ended up. So they actually got an ATF import license to import an enormous amount of AK-47 rounds, and the deal ended up falling through. But because the license had been issued, Efraim used a copy of the license as proof of past performance, even though that deal had never been completed. But the government never looked into it. They just looked at the paper and they're like, okay, check that box. And they didn't look into it further than that. So like a month and a half after we completed all, they sent a bunch of contracting officers to the office to like inspect our operation in person. And that's when Efraim really freaked out when he found out that they were going to come to the office. At that point, we had an office because it was when we got into the running to win the contract. He's like, okay, we should probably get an office. That's when he decided we were about to possibly win a $300 million contract. He should spend like $2,000 a month on an office. Yeah. So that's when we moved out of his apartment when, we stopped working in his living room. But so the government sent I think it was like 3 or 4 contracting officers. They were all like older ladies and like super sweet, like grandma types. And of course, Ephraim's a real charmer. So he like flirted with them. He's like, like when we first met, he tells like the lead, he's like, oh wow, I couldn't tell over the phone how beautiful you all were. You know, I mean, I gotta say, if it wasn't completely illegal, I'd be buying you all diamonds right now. So and they're like, oh, you're so silly. You know, you're such a charming young man. And so he really charmed them, and they gave us very high marks after their office visit. And like a month and a half later, Efraim calls me up and he tells me, I have good news and I have bad news. And I say to him, well, what's the bad news? And he tells me, well, our first task order is only $600K. And I'm like, well, we won the contract? And he's like, yeah, motherfucker. He's like, I'm coming to pick you up. We're going to celebrate. And so for people who don't know, it's a task order. The way it works, when they give you a really large contract, they don't just give you an order for like $300 million, right? They give it to you in pieces, right? So they have task order 1, task order 2, task order 3, and they're only legally required to give you, the way the solicitation was written, they're only legally required to give you the first task order. And then they didn't have to. So the $300 million amount was up to that amount. And they could order up to that amount, but they didn't have to order up to that amount. The only thing they had to do was order the first task order. And so we were nervous when we were bidding the contract because we thought, we're basing all our prices on these enormous numbers. Our transportation costs are only going to be this low if we are paying for 250 aircraft, right? If we're paying for one aircraft, it's going to be a lot more expensive. So if they only give us that first task order and it's small, we're kind of screwed because we can't deliver on that scale. And so he told me, he's like, oh, first task order is only $600K, which wasn't even enough to like fill up one aircraft. It was like a third of an aircraft load. And so we thought, well, crap, are they like testing us? Maybe we should deliver this at a loss just so we can prove to them that and then like a week later, they gave us a $50 million task order. And we're like, okay, no, it was just a procedural thing. I mean, that was just the money they had available at the time. And then once they issued the contract, additional money was allocated to it, and they were able to give us further task orders.
So going back to what you said about Afghanistan, and just to take a quick sidebar on the Afghanistan pullout, because that's going to be, what was that, 2021?
Either 2020 or 21. Yeah.
I think it was 21. So if it was 21, then we're coming up on 3 years this summer.
Right.
And so obviously we left all our shit there, right? We left helicopters, MRAPs, night vision goggles, all guns,
Hummers,
munitions, everything.
Everything.
And obviously we all have seen the videos of the Taliban walking around in plate carriers.
Right.
Now, like, I guess, what is your take on that? Because at face value, it's just like, okay, the government's just overtly leaving all this shit and just feeding it right back to the military-industrial complex to replenish.
Right. Well, I don't think that that was their intention to arm the Taliban. I sure hope not. The Taliban is not exactly friends of the United States. We've been fighting them for 20 years, literally, even though we kind of created them in the 80s in order to fight the Soviets. So they used to be our friends, and that's kind of how geopolitics works. Your enemies one year, your friends the next, and your enemies again the next year. So I think when the United States decided to pull out of Afghanistan, the hope and I think the belief was that the Taliban, not the Taliban, that the Afghan government, I think Hamid Karzai was he the president at that time? Or I don't think it was Hamid Karzai, but he was the president for a long time. So Hamid Karzai's government and his successor, the belief was that they would use the weapons we left there to defend themselves against the Taliban and maintain a democratically elected democracy that's friendly to the West in Afghanistan. Obviously, that didn't happen. It very spectacularly did not happen that way. So as soon as the United States left, pretty much the local Afghan forces that were allied to the United States more or less immediately gave up and surrendered, and the Taliban just took over with barely a fight within a few days. So that's how the Taliban managed to get all of our expensive equipment that they can now use. Of course, they're going to have some trouble with getting replacement parts for the more complicated systems, like the Hummers and the attack helicopters are going to be difficult to keep running if they even know how to run it in the first place. But so they're not going to be able to make use of all that. But they've got plenty of stuff that they can make use of, like all the small arms stuff. But what's interesting about the Taliban is that now that they're in power, they are actually fighting, ironically enough, in their own insurgency. So they've got ISIS-K, they're the ones who I think did the terrorist attack in Moscow, and they're also doing terrorist attacks against the Taliban as well. So the Taliban have their own extremists that they're now fighting, and it's always easy when you're the rebel, but when you become the king, then you have to deal with all the problems of ruling. So now that the Taliban is in power, they have to maintain their power, and they have to worry about all the things that a governing organization has to worry about, including all the more extreme elements of their society that aren't happy with them. So the Taliban has actually been shifting their philosophy a bit. And not as much as we would like, of course, but the Taliban is now more focused on just maintaining Afghanistan. They are less interested in the international jihad, which is what the West is mainly worried about. I mean, that's why we went into Afghanistan in the first place, is because that's where Al-Qaeda was based, and Al-Qaeda did the 9/11 attacks, and so the United States felt that we wouldn't be safe while these internationally focused terrorist organizations have bases that they can train and be safe in Afghanistan. So the Taliban is actually not very happy with ISIS-K, and ISIS-K is a very international jihad type of group. So Taliban is fighting them. So ironically enough, the Taliban is kind of doing the job that we wanted the democratically elected government in Afghanistan to do in the first place. Now, that's not to say they're the same. Taliban is still very oppressive of women and of anyone who doesn't subscribe to their extreme ideology and religion. But from the United States' security perspective, it's not as bad as we thought it would be when we first pulled out. Yeah, but of course that can change. I mean, all it takes is a new leader to come on board, and then they shift their focus back to the international, or maybe ISIS-K manages to take over, and then we'll have a real problem. So yeah, I mean, it's a complicated situation, and it's interesting and also tragic as well. As soon as the Taliban took over, the United States and the West cut them off from any aid, of course, because they're officially our enemies, right? But a lot of that aid was going to feed civilians on the ground. And so because the Taliban took over and the West cut off the aid, now Afghanistan has serious food insecurity issues. There's a lot of people going hungry there because they're not getting all that Western aid. And the West doesn't want to give them the aid because they figure the Taliban is just going to expropriate it and not give it to the people who need it anyway, and use it to fund themselves and fund terrorist operations, etc. So that's the concern. So yeah, it's a real tragic mess over there. Has been for quite a while.
Yeah. And like you said, it's crazy the way it unfolds, and how tomorrow it might look completely different than it does today.
Yeah, we have no idea. Yeah.
So you guys win the contract, and you go out and celebrate, is where you left off. Did it set in at the time that, like, because how old were you?
I was 24 at the time.
Okay, and you're 4 years older than Efraim?
Yeah, he was 21.
Oh, that's crazy.
Yeah.
So, like, did that set in that, like, here are these two kids that are now responsible for, like, a key piece of the Bush administration's foreign policy?
Yeah.
Like, were you thinking about that at the time, or would that set in a later time?
It was super exciting and super scary at the same time. It was setting in. I think when we finally won that contract, I'm like, holy shit, we've got a really big job ahead of us, but we can make a huge amount of money. So it's going to be very exciting and very scary at the same time. But that's what we were working for. So let's do this.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And so didn't Efraim like immediately, going back to his renegotiating, didn't he like immediately get to work and start grinding suppliers down and
Immediately
to crank your margins up?
Of course, the second. And he also started renegotiating with me as well. Yeah. So he's like, oh, so he was very clever in how he does things. At first he insisted that I manage the entire contract by myself. He's like, you got this. You can do this. I believe in you, David. You can do this. He's like, I'm gonna go after new contracts. I'm gonna go after new ones. Because we're really rolling. We're gonna go for everything. We're gonna get new contracts. And he's like, so I can't manage this because I'm gonna be going for new business. You manage this. And I was like, are you sure that's a good idea? I mean, maybe we should work on the contract that's 20 times bigger than the biggest contract you've ever won in your life. Maybe deliver on that. And he's like, no. You're good. You could do this. And then like a week later, he's like, I've been thinking about it a lot. And I don't think you can do it all by yourself. I can probably, I'm going to need to really work on this with you. He's like, but because I'm going to need to work on it with you, maybe, maybe we need to renegotiate, the percentages. I'm like, the whole point in the first place was that you were going to that's what we were going to do in the first place. But he just grinds you down. He comes up with all these ridiculous reasons. And so, yes, he started renegotiating with me, started renegotiating with the suppliers. And it was, at the time, we weren't even sure we were going to be able to deliver because there was a massive spike in oil prices in early 2007. And we quoted everything to be delivered by air freight because Afghanistan is a landlocked country. It's surrounded by unstable countries like Pakistan and all the other stands, Kyrgyzstan. And a lot of these countries have large areas of territory that are kind of run by warlords. So, and these warlords would love for a massive shipment of ammunition to go through their territory so they can grab it. And so the only real option to deliver this kind of material to Afghanistan was to ship through air freight. And the vast majority of air freight costs are the fuel. So when there was a big spike in oil prices, suddenly we were underwater on a lot of the contract. Our air freight expenses were more than it ended up being more than the profit margin we put on top of it. So we were actually going to lose money if we were going to deliver, particularly with the AK-47 ammo, because that was our highest volume and lowest margin item. So you can fit about I think it's about 2.7, 2.8 million rounds of AK ammo, depending on how it's packaged, into an IL-76, 45 tons. And that I think our sale price to the government was about a 10.5 cents a round. So we were selling it. That was about a little under $300,000 value of goods on the aircraft. And the aircraft itself, the flight cost about $100,000, right? But the grenades, we could fit 100,000 grenades, and we were clear. It was about $1 million worth of value. So an extra $20,000, $30,000 of air freight costs wasn't going to make much difference for the grenades, but it was more than we were going to make in profit for the AK-47 ammo. So we were scrambling. We were looking for different ways. We were trying to see if we could ship this through Russia, through the rail, the Trans-Siberian Railroad. That didn't turn out to be an option because the Russians really hated us. They kept on trying to interfere with our contract, actually, which came up later. But because they figured that if we failed to deliver on the contract, that they would get the contract back, because the U.S. Army would figure that they had no other choice and that they would have to go back to the Russians. So they kept on trying to interfere with us. When we were trying to get overflight permits to fly the goods into Afghanistan, the Russians kept on interfering with the companies, the countries that were supposed to give us overflight permits, and so they kept on delaying the shipments. And it actually got to the point where I think it was Uzbekistan was the last country that was holding out and giving us an overflight permit. And then I realized, Uzbekistan has a national airline. What if we hire their airline to do the shipment, and then we got the overflight permit? So they were willing to not listen to the Russians. So we know it was the Russians because I think it was Turkmenistan. I think it was Turkmenistan that gave us like an overflight permit, and then like Putin visited a few days later, and then they canceled the permit. Yeah, so it was just too much of a coincidence. We knew that they were interfering with it, and they were trying to get in the way. And then we had later on a flight land in Kyrgyzstan with a 747 cargo plane filled with ammo land in Kyrgyzstan. And the Kyrgyz intelligence services impounded the plane. They said, "Oh, you don't have the proper paperwork," and we knew that we did have the proper paperwork, and they wouldn't let our flight leave. And our the military attaché in the U.S. military attaché, which is the guy in the State Department, who is responsible for handling military matters, he kept on trying to figure out what was going on, and he couldn't figure out why they were kind of stonewalling him. And then it turned out that the Russians were leaning on the Kyrgyz people to interfere with our contract. Eventually, we got the plane released, but it took like a month and a half. So, yeah.
Didn't Robert Gates actually had to go out
Yes,
there,
that's
the
right.
Secretary of Defense at the time?
That
and what's
was
funny, I don't know if you've read his book, but he actually writes about this experience.
I did not.
I have it.
Oh, no way.
Yeah,
no way.
Since you haven't heard it,
I haven't.
Yeah, this is
I didn't know he wrote about it. Yeah, I remember him going out there. Yeah, that's cool.
All right, so here's what he said. In Bishkek, Kyrgyzstan, where Manas Airfield had become a vital link in our aerial resupply, the amazingly corrupt government of Kurmanbek Bakiev saw our continued need for the airfield as a rich source of revenue, or as I called it, extortion. The Kyrgyz were once again making noises about closing the airfield, and we had to have it open, so I went to see him and let him pick our pockets again. And then he says a couple other things, but then he ends it by saying, he was without question the most unpleasant foreign leader I ever had to deal with in my years as SecDef, and I celebrated when he was overthrown in April 2010. How funny is that?
That is funny. Yeah, I remember he flew into Kyrgyzstan specifically because of our shipment, because they wouldn't let our shipment go. And then like the next week he was flying into Bishkek to negotiate with them.
Wild, bro.
Yeah.
Just going back again, like now you're like you guys are a chess piece between Putin and Bush. Like that's
it's
crazy to think about.
Yeah. Definitely not something I ever thought I would be a part of.
This might be like a weird idea or a stupid one, but when you're thinking of like going back to the fuel prices going up, and I think Henry disappeared because like he didn't want to eat the uptick in charges, and he's like, you guys are fucking idiots for not foreseeing this, whatever. But did you think about like, you ever think about like paying a bunch of Blackwater contractors to ride in with it or something?
You mean like through Pakistan?
Right, like if you were to drive it in or train it in or something, like hiring a bunch of contractors or something like that.
That was something we were considering doing, because also it would have saved us an enormous amount of money on shipping. Because if we could ship it by ocean and then by truck or rail, it's like an order of magnitude less in costs. So we would have made a massive amount of money. And there was plenty of money to pay for security services. But we were heavily advised not to do that by the Army. They said, it's a very high risk operation, and better to better to make less money and be sure that your stuff is going to get there. Because if we lost our shipment, we get zero.
Right.
I mean, it's not like we lose the profit margin. We lose the principal. So that could destroy like a single shipment lost could destroy our entire company, because we only had enough money really to do like a few shipments at a time. And then we had to get the money back in order to fund the next shipments. So if we lost one of the shipments and we got paid nothing for it, we would have no money to continue shipping.
Right. And so in the movie, you guys find out that the ammo is Chinese, and then you decide to repack it. But in real life, obviously, you decided to repack it first to save on
the shipping
weight,
costs,
and then you found out it was Chinese. So how did that go down?
Right. So when we were scrambling to figure out what we were going to do about these increased shipping costs, and we were looking into doing the Trans-Siberian Railroad or shipping by boat to Pakistan, and then hiring the Blackwater guys to ride shotgun by overland to Afghanistan. We were looking into all those options, and then I had the idea. I told Efraim, I'm like, we got pictures of these crates of the ammo that the Albanians had sent us, and the way it was packaged, it was the ammo was in these metal, what they call sardine cans, which is vacuum sealed metal canisters, and those canisters are placed in these wooden crates, and the wooden crates are pretty like bulky. So I told Efraim, like, those wooden crates kind of look heavy. If we just take the sardine cans out and just strap them to the pallet, we could probably save a bunch of weight, and maybe we'll at least, at the very minimum, we won't lose as much. Possibly it'll push us over the finish line and get us to profitability. And he's like, "Oh, that's a great idea. That's a great idea. We need to find out what those crates weigh." And so I was like, "Oh, I could ask the Albanians to weigh it for us." And he goes, "No, we can't trust those fuckers. They'll tell us whatever we want to hear. We need to send someone on the ground to do it ourselves, right?" And he's like, "But I need you." He's like, "I need you here in Miami because you're taking care of," I was still doing the vast majority of the work on the Afghan contract because he was chasing after other contracts. So I was dealing with all because it wasn't just Albania that we were buying from. It was like 30 different items, as we were buying items from all over Eastern Europe. And so I was coordinating with everybody and with the logistics companies, and I was coordinating with the U.S. government during the day. So I was working like double shifts. I was doing the U.S. government during the day and all the Eastern European people, at night or early morning. And he's like, we need someone on the ground, but I want you to stay in Miami. So I told him, well, what about Alex? Alex was my best friend at the time, and we grew up together. I met him in third grade, and he had just he was a dual citizen with France, so he had just gotten out of the French military. He did a little stint in the French military, and he was looking for work. He graduated from college. He had a degree in international relations. He was very interested in politics and stuff. And so I said, well, Alex is a very smart guy. He's multilingual. He knows about international relations. He can be our guy on the ground. And Ephraim's like, yeah, that's a great idea. Let's get Alex and send him over there. So Alex goes over there, and he calls me up, and he says, he's like, hey, I just got to look at the crates, and he's like, you do know that this is all Chinese ammo, right? And I tell him, what are you talking about? It's Albanian ammo. And he says, no, it's definitely Chinese. It's got Chinese markings all over the boxes. And I said, are you sure about that? He's like, oh yeah, I'm absolutely sure. And I tell Efraim, and Ephraim's like, oh shit. He's like, let's make sure. Tell him to send us some pictures. Big mistake, right? Email us some pictures. So he emails us a bunch of pictures of the crates. He opens up the crates, the sardine cans. There's Chinese markings on the sardine cans as well. He opens it up. There's even like little papers inside the sardine cans with Chinese writing on it. And this was a problem for us because our contract specifically said no Chinese ammunition can be delivered under this contract, either directly or indirectly. That's the way they put it. And the reason they put that in the contract is because there's an arms embargo against China. So in 1989, because of the Tiananmen Square massacre, there was a big protest in Tiananmen Square, which is the main square in Beijing, by a bunch of Chinese college students. They were protesting for democracy in 1989, and there's a very famous picture called Tank Men with a guy like standing in front of a line of tanks, and because the Chinese government brought in tanks and soldiers and killed massive amounts of the protesters. And this was all on like international news, and it became a big international scandal, of course. And so, because of that incident, the United States placed China on embargo. So it's illegal for U.S. Citizens or U.S. companies to buy or sell military goods with the Chinese, companies or government. And so, because of that, the U.S. Army put in our contract that we can't deliver Chinese ammunition directly or indirectly. Now, the thing is that the ammo in Albania had been given to Albania by the Chinese in the 70s, right? Albania made an alliance with China. They felt that the dictator of Albania at the time felt that the Russians weren't true communists. They weren't communist enough for him. So he made an alliance with China. And so he was scared of getting invaded by the Soviet Union because the Soviet Union didn't like people who, disaligned themselves. They'd invaded a bunch of other countries who did the same thing. And he was also scared that he was going to get invaded by NATO because he's a true communist believer. And so he thought the world's two superpowers are going to invade his tiny little country. And so he made an alliance with China and got a massive amount of weapons and ammunition sent to him because the Chinese were thrilled to have a ally in Europe, and they had a foothold in Europe through Albania. And he built a massive network of underground tunnels, bunkers in Albania, and filled them with the weapons and ammo so that they would be protected from bombardment. And his plan was what he called total war, that every man, woman, and child in the country, when the invasion happens, becomes a soldier and everyone fights to the death. It's like World War I style. Everyone is on the line. And of course, the war never came. And so the Cold War ended, and Albania still had a massive amount of this Chinese ammo lying around. And in 2006, 2007, Albania decided that they wanted to join NATO. And one of NATO's requirements was that Albania get rid of all their old Soviet-era ammo. So they were going to have to actually pay to have it dismantled. And they were paying to have it dismantled already. They, in fact, hired a company called, I think, Southern Ammunition, an American company, that subcontracted to an Albanian company to do the dismantling. I think it might have been a U.S. Army contract, which is how the American company got involved. I don't know that many details about that particular situation, but it ended up resulting in a massive explosion at Gerdek, which people tend to confuse. They think that we were involved with it. Like I see YouTube comments blaming me and Efraim for the explosion at Gerdek, which we had nothing to do with it. Our connection to it is that the people we were buying our ammo from, the Albanians that we were buying our ammo from, were the same Albanians who were involved in the Gerdek explosion. So, but we weren't involved in that. Just to be clear, for all the haters in the YouTube comments, I'm sure they're going to still say the same thing. So we knew that the ammo was given to the Albanians in the 70s because it has the year of manufacture on the ammo. And because it was given in the 70s, that ammo was actually legal under the embargo because it only became illegal after 1989. You could buy ammunition in 1988 from China legally, import into the United States, and then in 1990 resell it because it was bought legally, right? So it's legal ammunition. So we figured this ammo in Albania is legal as far as the embargo is concerned. However, our commercial contract with the Army did not mention the embargo at all. It just said no Chinese ammunition directly or indirectly, period. And so we thought, well, we can go to the U.S. Army and say, hey, you guys meant to put in no Chinese ammunition, that violates the embargo, right? I mean, that's why that clause is there. So this ammunition does not violate the embargo. Can we get a waiver? Can you just sign this letter saying that we can deliver this ammo? And in retrospect, they probably would have done it. From what we found out later, they even after they found out it was Chinese ammo, they still kept taking delivery on it. So in retrospect, they probably would have given us that waiver. But at the time, we thought, well, there's also a risk that they could say something along the lines of, well, all your competitors that you beat out for this contract, they were not happy that you won this contract. We did beat out like General Dynamics and ATK Systems. These are multi-billion dollar publicly traded companies with like a team of 100 people working on this, and we beat them. And they were very upset when they lost.
I bet.
Yeah, because we knew them. We like met some of their leaders at the trade shows, and they were very confident they were going to win this. And then we snatched the contract out from under them. So they were very upset. They filed complaints with the Army against us. It was a whole thing. And they tried to get our contract invalidated. But so we knew that they were looking for any reason to pounce on us. So we figured, well, General Dynamics, if they find out about this, they're going to file a complaint and say, oh, they bid this ammo that goes against the requirements of the solicitation, because the solicitation said no Chinese ammo. They bid this Chinese ammo. It's not fair that you allowed them to deliver this Chinese ammo. So there's a possibility that the U.S. Army may decline our request to deliver the Chinese ammo. And if they decline, we're kind of screwed, right? Because we already got all the flyover permits, we got all the export license. To change suppliers now is going to take us at least 3 to 4 more months. And the U.S. Army was screaming at us, we need the ammo now. It's fighting season in Afghanistan. Because they only fight during like the spring and summertime, because in the winter the snows are too high and they can't go through the mountain passes in Afghanistan. So they have a fighting season. And our allies in Afghanistan were running out of ammo. And so the U.S. Army was screaming at us, hurry up and deliver the ammo. Our allies are running out of ammo. And so we figured, well, maybe it's less risky, rather than telling them about it and having the risk of them declining us, and then we're in a really bad spot. Maybe we just don't tell them about it, right? What they don't know won't hurt them, right? And in order for them not to find out, we need to repackage this ammunition. I mean, we were going to take them out of the metal tins, out of the wooden crates in order to save on weight. But now we got to get rid of the metal tins too, because the metal tins have Chinese markings on it. And inside the metal tins, there's paperwork with Chinese markings on it. So we have to get rid of all that. And so we hired, Alex found a cardboard box manufacturer in Albania, and to get a very large quantity of thick cardboard boxes. And we hired that guy to do the repackaging operation. He had his factory workers come into the warehouse and repackage the ammo, to take it out of the metal tins and put it into these sealed plastic bags to prevent corrosion, and then package that into the cardboard boxes. And before we doing this, we sent an email to the receiving officer in Kabul, and we told him, because of this, the age of this ammo, which there was no age limit on our ammo. Our one requirement was that it be serviceable without qualification. That was what they called it, which means it had to work. They have much stricter rules for U.S. soldier, for ammo given to U.S. soldiers. But, for the Taliban, not Taliban, for the, well, now the Taliban have it, but for the Afghanis, the requirements were much lower. And the U.S. government was happy to save money on that, so they didn't really care. But so we told the receiving officer in Kabul that in order to make sure that the ammo was good, we're going to be inspecting all the ammo. So we're going to be taking out of the original packaging and inspecting it and repackaging it in these plastic bags and cardboard boxes. Is that acceptable packaging configuration to the U.S. Army? And he wrote us back, that's a great idea. You should guys are so happy you guys are putting in the extra effort to do the inspections. Sure, I approve the new packaging configuration. And we're like, okay, we're good to go. So we start doing the repackaging, and and then we start delivering. And the receiving officer in Kabul receives the ammo. He inspects it. He's thrilled. All the ammo was great condition. Went banging out the barrel. No corrosion on it. Everything was in really good condition and good quality. And we started delivering 3 to 4 aircraft every week. Like every other day, we'd have an aircraft land, and it started going like clockwork. And of course, Efraim, he's not used to things being smooth. Everything's always like an emergency with him, right? It's just his personality. I remember him once. So at this point, we had about 15 employees because he was building up a boiler room because he had bought some ammo like overseas, and he was selling it into the commercial market. And so he had like 4 or 5 guys just manning the phones all day, calling pretty much every gun shop in America, trying to sell them the ammo so he could maximize his profits. So we had a few secretaries, and so he would come. We had about 15 employees at this time. He would walk into the office, and he would see people chatting, and he'd start screaming, "What the fuck? I don't pay you to talk. Get on your fucking computer and make me some fucking money." That's how he would, he was not cool with people chilling, that was just he felt like they were wasting his money. And might be true, but he always, there always had to be some sort of emergency. He was not used to things going smoothly. And so when things started, the 4 or 5 aircraft, 4 aircraft per week started going into Afghanistan, he started thinking, he's like, he calls up the box guy, right, who was doing the repackaging, and he
Costa,
talks,
right?
Yeah, Costa Trebishka, yeah. And he asked him, he's like, "Do you have any connections in the Albanian Ministry of Defense?" And Costa's like, "Oh yeah, I actually have an uncle or a cousin who works there." And he's like, "Can you find out what they're paying for the ammo we're buying?" And goes, "Yeah, sure, I'll find out for you." Comes back to him a few days later. Turns out that the Albanian government is getting paid 2 cents a round, and we're paying 4 cents a round to Henry, and that pissed Efraim off to no end. He's like, "He's doubling his money. That motherfucker. He's making 2 cents a round on every round." And I'm like, "Yeah, Efraim, we're making 1.50 cents on every round. We're selling it to the government for 10.5 cents, and we're paying 9 cents." About, I think it was 9 cents because we were paying 5 cents in shipping costs and 4 cents for the actual ammo. And he's like, "Yeah, but this is our contract. We should be making all that money." He's like, "I'm gonna go to Albania, and I'm gonna strike a deal with the Albanians directly. I'm gonna cut this motherfucker out." And I'm like, "Efraim, maybe you shouldn't do that, he's a really good source for us. He set this whole thing up, we're making money, leave it alone. Let's just keep on making money. In fact, this isn't even the biggest money-making part of the contract. We're making way more money on the grenades and on the rockets. Why are you He's like, "It doesn't matter. It's all fucking money. It all matters." So he goes to me. He's like, "I'll tell you what. I'm going to go to Albania. I'm getting a ticket. What I need you to do is I need you to take all the quotes that you got from our other suppliers, and I need you to doctor them." He's like, "I need you to change those prices and make them much lower so they're lower than what the Albanians offer us. So I can take those documents and go to the Albanians and tell them, 'Look, I got much better prices. So you guys better, give me a better price.'" And so I did that, it wasn't hard to do. It's just PDF editing software, And he prints it out. He goes to Albania. He talks to Yili Panari, who's the lead Albanian for MACO, the organization that does the exporting for them. And Yili takes one look at his papers, and he's like, "That's all fake. Don't give me your fake documents," because he's in the industry. He knows what people are selling this ammo for, and he knows that nobody can beat the Albanian price because the Albanians are going to have to pay for it to be dismantled anyway, so they're willing to take literally anything. And he's like, "Don't show me your fake documents." And Ephraim's like, "Oh, come on. I need a better price. He wouldn't leave him alone, right? 2-3 days later, Yili calls up Efraim. He's like, look. I'll tell you what. I'll make a meeting with you and the guy who can make this decision." He takes Efraim to this construction site, and Alex went with him. So Alex told me this story because Alex was there. Alex goes with him, with Efraim, to this construction site. It's like this high-rise construction. They go into the construction site. This building is under construction. They go like up these stairs into this room, and suddenly it's this like beautifully furnished, like Wall Street type office, right in the middle of this building that's supposedly under construction. And there's, the big long table. At the end of the table is this real tough-looking Albanian guy. And Alex told me the second Efraim stepped in that room, Efraim was always talking shit very loud, always, kind of getting in people's faces and stuff. He got really quiet the second he got into that room because he knew he couldn't do that. He took one look at this guy and he knew that he couldn't pull this off. This guy's name was Deliorgi. Turns out this guy was like the head of the Albanian mob and apparently had some sort of deal with the Albanian government to do this deal. And also at that meeting was the Albanian prime minister's son that Alex recognized later. By the way, the Albanian prime minister's son ended up suing me and Alex and Diveroli and not Warner Brothers, Simon and Schuster, who published the War Dogs book, because in the War Dogs book, Guy Lawson writes about this meeting, and so he sued us for libel. Yeah, it ended up losing. The case got thrown out because you can't deny. I mean, there was multiple eyewitnesses there. Efraim and Alex both recognized him and recognized his picture later. But just defending against that lawsuit, I think Simon and Schuster ended up losing more money than they made on the books. So that sucks. But luckily, they covered the legal bills and not me. So I didn't have to, go bankrupt defending myself against a frivolous lawsuit. Yeah, so anyway, so Deliorgi is there with the prime minister's son listening in. And Deliorgi tells Efraim, he's like, look, I know that you hired this guy, Kosta Trubishka, to repackage your ammunition. And you're paying him like a good amount of money to do this. No, we were paying him like $100K to do it, and he was saving us like $3 million in shipping costs. So it was not bad. It was a good deal for us, right? But Deliorgi says, he's like, if you give me the contract to do the repackaging, I'll make money on that, and then I could give you a small discount on the ammunition. And so Ephraim's like, that sounds great. Kosta's fired. You're hired. Let's do this, right? And so he got a very small, like it was a very small discount, but he got something. And so Diveroli comes back from Albania, and I get a phone call from Kosta. And Kosta tells me, he's like, hey, I understand that you're changing suppliers for the boxes and for the repackaging contract. And I understand business is business, you can do this. But you guys told me you wanted me to do this repackaging operation. So I have about $20,000 worth of boxes that I have nothing to do with now. So you guys are going to need these boxes anyway. Why don't you just buy these boxes off me? And I said to him, yeah, that makes sense. Let me talk to Efraim, and we'll buy the boxes off you. So I tell Efraim, I'm like, hey, Kosta has these boxes. Why don't we buy the boxes? Efraim's, yeah, don't worry about it. I'll take care of it. A week goes by. Kosta calls me up again, and he's like, hey, I still haven't been paid for the boxes. What's going on? And I told Efraim, like, Kosta hasn't been paid. He's like, fuck that guy. Who cares? Who cares about him? He was like, the new guys have all the boxes they need. They don't even want to deal with him. So just screw him. Just stop taking his phone calls. I'm like, dude, this is $20,000, man. Just fucking pay him. What's the problem? He's like, nah, he's not gonna do anything. Just let it go. And apparently he did do something, because he got really upset, and we found out later. Of course, we didn't know at the time. And he called up the New York Times, and he told them everything we were doing. And he called up the FBI, told them everything we were doing. And he called up, his biggest mistake was he called up the local Albanian press and told them that the Albanian prime minister was getting kickbacks from this deal. And then about a week or two after that article came out, he was found dead under very serious, very, very mysterious circumstances, I could say. He was found like he was by himself in an empty field, like he had been thrown like from his car, like he was like 30 feet away from his car, and it looked like he had been run over by his own car. So very suspicious circumstances. And yeah, and that was and so we thought, well, it's narrow miss there, right? That's an internal Albanian problem, right? And then, of course, as soon as Efraim comes back from Albania, like a few days later, he walks into my office and he says to me, a lot of the guys around the office, they've been saying that you're not pulling your weight anymore, around here. And I'm like, what are you talking about? I'm not pulling my weight. The contract's going well. We're delivering 4 aircraft loads a week. And he's like, yeah, the Afghan contract is going smooth, but our Iraq contracts are really struggling, and you're not helping out with that. And I said, but I'm not part of those contracts. I'm not getting paid on that, so why should I help with that? And he's like, well, because if we get canceled for cause on the Iraq contract, if they cancel our contracts because we're not delivering, the whole company could go down, and that takes your Afghan contract with it. So you got to help on the Iraq contracts too. So I said, well, are you going to pay me, a percentage of the Iraq contract? It's like, oh, don't be ridiculous. You didn't get to help us win those contracts. Why should you get it? Well, yeah, but you want me to deliver on them. And he's like, okay, well, I'll tell you what. I wouldn't do this for anybody else, right? I own 100% of AEY, and I always intended to keep it that way. But David, you're my best friend, and you've really helped the company grow, and we wouldn't be here today if it wasn't for you. So I'm going to make an exception, and you're going to be the only guy I make this offer to. But I'll tell you what, I'll give you a respectable salary of $100K a year as an executive of AEY, and I'll give you 1% of AEY. And I said, 1% of AEY, I'm supposed to make 25% of the Afghan contract, and the Afghan contract is probably going to make us 90% plus of all the money we're going to make in the next 2 years. So I think I'll keep, the original deal that we had, rather than change it to 1%. And he's like, well, but that original deal just doesn't work. This is the only thing that we can do. 1% and 100K salary. That's it. And I said, well, no, I'm not going to do that. He's like, well, how about nothing then? And I said, well, I'll see you in court, you piece of shit. And I was this close to punching him in the face, like I do in the movie, right? But that's Hollywood for you. I realized if I punched him in the face that he would probably sue me and give him a whole bunch of leverage and ammo that I didn't need him to have over me. So very narrowly restrained myself. But I just walked out and I said, I'll see you in court, you piece of shit. And that was how I left AEY. And that was and I'd been living off of my savings the entire time because he didn't pay me anything, right? So I had won a bunch of contracts, like for the fuel and worked on some gun parts contracts and a few other things. But every time we would complete the contract, I was already working on other contracts, and he would say, we're going to need a bunch of money for this next contract. So why don't we, I'm funding it from my end, from my money is funding this contract. So it's only fair that your money funds it too. So he never actually paid me for any of the contracts I completed. He kept on rolling my profits into the next contract. So I kept on living off my savings. That 100K I started with was dwindling down to like 30K at that point, like a year and a half later. And I realized that I was close to losing all my money, and now he wasn't going to pay me the millions of dollars that I was expecting to come. And so it was one of the hardest points in my life, because also at this time my daughter was about 6 months old, and I realized I'm going to need to support a kid. And I thought I went from like thinking I was going to be a multi-millionaire set for life to literally about to go bankrupt and unable to pay rent and support my kid. That was like the the change. So it was an extremely difficult time. I was like super depressed for like a good 2 weeks, and eventually got myself out of my funk. And I realized, hey, you know, I know how to do this business. So why don't I just start my own business to do government contracting? So I incorporated my own business and started working on some contracts. And then about 2 months later, I get a phone call from one of the secretaries at the office. I was on good terms with everybody at the office. I was considered the nice boss, and he was like the dick, right? Because he, as I said, he would like run into the office and just start screaming at everybody to work harder. And so I was on good terms with everyone. And so I get a call from one of the secretaries, and she's like, "Hey, I just wanted you to know that that the federal agents just raided the office, and they asked us all to step away from our computers, and they're boxing up all the documents. And so I just wanted you to know." And I was like, "Oh shit, we're fucked." And so I call up Alex, who's still in Albania. He was still managing the logistics there. And I tell him, "Hey, the feds just raided the office." And he's like, "What? Why?" Because like in his mind, it wasn't like illegal what we were doing. And we none of us were actually really sure whether it was illegal because we knew we weren't violating the embargo, right? We were violating the terms of the contract, but that's in Alex's mind and in our minds, we thought that's a commercial like breach of contract, which isn't criminal. I mean, you can get sued for it, and you can get financial penalties, but it's not necessarily a criminal thing. So that's what we thought, because it wasn't like we were scamming the government. We were delivering what they wanted. It just didn't fulfill every term in our commercial contract. It was Chinese ammunition. Well, when our contract said that we can't deliver Chinese ammunition, right? So we thought it was a commercial issue, right? A civil issue. So I told him, I'm like, I don't know, maybe this is about the Chinese ammo, maybe it's about something else. So he calls up Danny. Danny is the guy that Efraim replaced me with. He ended up screwing Danny too, and he also ended up screwing the guy he replaced Danny with. It's just like how he does business. Literally everybody he goes into business ends up getting screwed. It's still to this day. I mean, I still occasionally get phone calls from people. "Oh, I'm about to enter into a big lawsuit. I made the big mistake of doing business with this guy. I should have known better." Like every year and a half, 2 years, I get a phone call like that from somebody. So he's still doing what he's doing. He's still the same guy. But so Alex calls up Danny, and he says to Danny, Alex wanted to feel him out to see what was going on. So Alex says to Danny, "Hey, I need these documents. I've got an aircraft landing this afternoon. I need these documents to get the export permit. Can you get me that documents?" Because he knew that the documents were all in the office, and the federal agents just kicked everybody out of the office. So he wanted to see what he would say. So Alex tells me that he hears Danny cover the microphone on his phone and whispered at Ephraim, "Hey, Ephraim, it's Alex. He's asking me for these documents. What should I tell him?" And he hears Ephraim whisper back, "Oh shit, the documents are in the office. Oh, we can't get them. Tell him that there's a bomb threat. Yeah, there's a bomb threat in the office, and we all had to leave, but we'll get it to him soon. All right, so just sit tight. We'll get it to him soon." And so Danny gets on the phone. "Oh, there was a bomb threat," and like he doesn't know that Alex heard the whole thing. And Alex is thinking, why is Ephraim lying to me? Right? Why doesn't he tell me the truth? Well, maybe it's because Ephraim is planning to throw me under the bus and blame everything on me. He's going to say something like, "Oh, Alex was the guy in the ground, and I had no idea he was just doing this to protect his very cushy, high salary job." Which, I mean, he had a decent salary. He wasn't part of he wasn't getting like a percentage, but he had a decent salary. So that's what Alex figured, that that Efraim was going to say. And so Alex says, I'm not going down for this piece of shit. He's lying to me. And he was on the next flight home. And so Alex and I both contact a criminal defense lawyer, and our lawyer tells us, well, first thing you should do is go into your emails and search for all the keywords that you think incriminate you. So if you think that it might be something about repackaging Chinese ammunition, search for repackage and Chinese ammunition. And as soon as we did that search, we realized we were screwed because Efraim had asked Alex to send him the pictures. Ralph had sent an email with instructions on how to use a wood sander to get rid of the Chinese markings, like with literally step-by-step instructions of like, this is how you use. He even had a picture of like Chinese markings and what it looked like after you used a wood sander on it. Like it was like literal step-by-step instructions of like how to get rid of the Chinese. So like we knew that there's no way that we're going to be able to spin this. We knew that we were screwed. And so we told our lawyers that, and they're like, well, if you know that the government has rock solid evidence against you, and they definitely have access to your emails at this point, they're not going to do and if they don't have it yet, they're going to have it soon. And don't delete anything because they're going to know if you deleted it, and that's a separate crime. So don't delete anything. If you know that there's rock solid evidence against you, then really your only option here is to cooperate, because if you fight them, you're going to lose, and then they're going to really slam you. So our lawyers contact the agents, and we agree to be interviewed. The agent, and the way it works is they say, okay, you're going to tell us everything you know, and if we think that you're holding anything back, right? Or if you say anything, that if you misrepresent anything, if you change anything, if you omit anything, and we think you did it on purpose, you get zero credit for cooperation. And we're going to tell the judge to go hard on you because you're being dishonest with us. So you better tell us everything, right? Your life depends on it, literally. And so, of course, I told him everything. Alex told him everything. And at the end of the interview, because they don't tell you what they know, because they don't want to tip you off and give you ways of like hiding information or anything. So they're taking notes, et cetera, et cetera. At the end of the interview, they're like, just so you know, I know you're wondering what we know already, right? So just so you know, when we did the raid on the office, we found a to-do list on Efraim's desk in his handwriting. And one of the items on the to-do list was repackaged Chinese ammunition.
It's a good thing you didn't hold out on him.
Yeah. It's a good thing we didn't hold out on him. Yeah. And so they told us, the federal agents, they told us, you guys aren't a target of the investigation. You're not even working for the company anymore. David, you didn't even make a penny off this. This guy screwed you. You didn't benefit financially. Alex, you were just doing your, a salaried position, and you quit as soon, you came forward as soon as it was, relevant. So, you're not the target of the investigation. Efraim's the target. We're really just going for him. So we're going to do our best not to charge you with any crimes. You'll just be a witness. And I said, great, because I can't fucking afford a lawyer. And then we didn't hear anything from them for like 6 months. And we thought, well, maybe they're not going to pursue this investigation, because sometimes, they open up investigations and they realize their evidence isn't as strong, or it's just not important, or whatever reason. They don't always take every investigation to the end, right? So we thought maybe this is going to just go away, because we hadn't heard anything from them for 6 months. And then in March 28th, 2008, a date that shall live in infamy. I'll always remember it.
I bet.
Yeah. The New York Times published a front page article with a picture of rusty looking ammunition on the front page next to mine and Ephraim's mugshots, where we look very, very guilty. And we did not look good. The ammo did not look good. The ammo actually was a picture. It wasn't even the Chinese ammo that they put on the front page. It was actually Bulgarian ammo that Efraim had bought this ammo sight unseen because our grenades were coming from Bulgaria. And we had some extra room on the aircraft, and he got a deal, an offer for like 30,000 rounds of a very small amount, 30,000 rounds, relatively speaking, of ammunition. And it was a very, very low price. But it wasn't like worth to fly over there to inspect it because it was such a small quantity. And the aircraft was going to leave like within a few days, so we were very short on time. So Efraim decided to roll the dice and he figured, I'll buy this ammo, and if it's good and we'll make a very large margin on it, great. And if it's not good, well, it's not that expensive anyway, and they'll just reject it, and not a big deal anyway. We have extra room on the aircraft anyway. And so he bought the ammo. He had it loaded on the plane without even inspecting it. It gets to Afghanistan. The receiving officer took one look at it, and he's like, "This is shit, guys. How could you even ship this stuff to me? Don't do that again. I'm not paying you for this." And he rejected it outright. Did not pay for it, so Efraim lost the money. And but Afghanistan doesn't have any ammunition recycling facilities, so they had nothing to do. They didn't want to pay to ship it back. So pretty much what they did is they just pushed it to the side of the airport and they just left it there. And so when the New York Times came to investigate, started asking around, can I see some of the stuff that AEY has delivered? Someone, oh yeah, that's some stuff they delivered right there. And so that was the stuff that they got pictures of. And they implied that all the stuff we were delivering was this corroded, really low quality, defective ammunition. And that article became a big scandal. It was because we were so young, and they had pulled like the local police records from Miami Beach. That's how they got our mugshots, because we had been arrested on. That's another story, but we had been arrested on Ephraim's 21st birthday, because he got into a fight with his valet, and the valet guy hated him for some reason, and he hated the valet guy. And it was one of those buildings where you had to get the valet guy to get your own car. You couldn't park your own car. And it was his 21st birthday, and we were going to go out to a club, and we got to the valet area, and the guy wasn't there. And so he's like, "Oh, great, I don't have to deal with this asshole." And he goes into the valet's like cabinet where he keeps all the keys. He's like rummaging, trying to find his keys. And right then the valet guy comes around the corner. He's like, "You can't be in there," And Ephraim's like, "I just want my keys. I just want my keys." And the guy comes up to him and clocks him right in the face. Yeah. He hit Efraim first. And so Efraim starts punching him back, and they're fighting. And then the security guard runs over, and we pull them apart. And Ephraim's like screaming. He's like, "You motherfucker!" The guy was Cuban. He's like, "You motherfucker! I'm gonna get you deported, you piece of shit!" Yeah, And I'm calling the cops. And so Ephraim's like shirt was all ripped, and so he decides to go up to get his shirt changed. He's like, "Oh, let's go. I got to change my shirt. I'm gonna call the cops, get this guy arrested." We go up to his apartment. He gets changed. He calls the cops. He's like, "I was just attacked by my valet person." We go back down, and the cops like separate us, and they ask us, what happened, and we tell them, and then like they go talk to the valet guy, and they talk to the security guy, and then a cop comes back to me. He's like, "Yeah, turn around, put your hands behind your back. You're under arrest." I'm like, "What are you talking about? Why?" He's like, "Oh, well, the security guard says that you were holding the valet guy down while your friend was beating him." I'm like, "That's not true. I was pulling them apart. The security guy was pulling the other guy apart. Why? There's security cameras right there. Why don't you go look at the footage? You'll see that's not true." They're like, "We don't need to look at the footage. We have a witness statement. That's all we need. So you're under arrest." Just like that. I'm like, "You fucking, what the fuck? All you have to do is look at the security footage. You'll see that's not true." So that's how we got arrested. That's how we got our mug shots into the system. And And I think they found some like weed on Efraim also, so that got into the record. And so that when the New York Times wrote the article, they called us the Stoner Arms Dealers, and that became like our nickname in the media, the Stoner Arms Dealers. And it was, and of course, they made a big deal about how young we were and how the Bush administration was so incompetent in trusting this massive contract to a bunch of kids, a bunch of stoners, and because it was such a scandalous article, the article got reprinted. It got into the Associated Press network, and it got reprinted by pretty much every major newspaper in the world. So I had a Google alert set on my name, and I saw my name pop up in like every major like city around the world. So like London published it, and Mumbai published it, and pretty much every major newspaper in every major city around the world, like 300 something newspapers published this article. So it became worldwide news. And Congress held hearings on the floor of Congress about us. There's like I think there's a clip on YouTube where some senator is like has a picture of our mugshots on the front, on one of those big notebook paper things that they have like on the easel, on the floor of Congress. It's like, and who would trust this person over here for a $300 million contract?
A contract is given to a company in Miami, Florida that had been a shell company for some years. $300 million was given to that company. Turns out the company is run by a 22-year-old man named Efraim Diveroli. And by the way, his vice president was a massage therapist named David Packouz, a former masseur. And between the two of them, they got $300 million in taxpayer contracts. I'll tell you who gave it to them. The Army Sustainment Command did it. And I want the general in charge of the Army Sustainment Command to come to the Congress and explain, how do you give $300 million in contracts to what had been a shell company, now run by a 22-year-old and a 25-year-old massage therapist?
This is the incompetence of the administration, So it became a political thing. They wanted us to, at first they were going to subpoena us to testify in front of Congress, but our lawyers told the Congress people that we would just plead the fifth the whole time because there's an open criminal investigation. So they decided they didn't want to go through the whole show of calling us up to testify just to have us plead the fifth. So they canceled the subpoena. So we didn't have to testify in front of Congress, which I was a little disappointed. I thought it would have been cool to plead the fifth like a mobster in front of Congress, but no. Like 2 days later, after the New York Times article came out, the Army released a statement saying that they had no idea any of this was happening. They're shocked and appalled, and they're canceling the contract. And of course, in court later on, it came out that they knew the whole time. That in fact, after the raid, so this came out in court because Ralph ended up taking this to trial. And so part of the discovery process, you can request like emails like between government officials as part of the discovery process. So it came out that the Justice Department, after they did the raid on the office, emailed the U.S. Army and informed them that the ammunition we were delivering was Chinese, and that they may want to consider stopping to take delivery on it. And the U.S. Army replied by email saying, this ammunition is critical to the mission in Afghanistan, and if you want us to stop taking delivery on it, we're going to need a letter from the Attorney General of the United States requesting us to stop taking delivery on it. And that letter from the Attorney General never was sent. So they kept on taking delivery on it. And for 6 months after they found out it was Chinese, they kept taking delivery on it. So they knew the whole time, and they were totally fine with it, which makes me think we probably could have gotten that waiver. But, hindsight and all that. And then about 2 days after the Army contract, 2 days later after the Army canceled the contract, the Justice Department announced that they were going to bring charges against us. And the charges they brought against us was fraud. They said that we were lying to the Army about the origin of the Chinese ammo. And so the way they structured it was they said, you know, you guys, every time you delivered an aircraft load, you provided a document called a Certificate of Conformance, right? A COC. And in this document, you list the type of ammunition that's on the aircraft, the quantity of the ammunition, the year that it was manufactured, and crucially, the place of origin. And the place of origin you listed as Albania. And you knew that the true place of origin was China. And not only did you know, but you had a whole repackaging operation to hide that it was China. So every document that you submitted with knowingly false information on it is an act of fraud. And you delivered 71 aircraft loads of this ammo. So that's 71 acts of fraud, each of which can get you up to 5 years in prison. So you're looking at 355 years in prison if you fight us, right? But if you don't fight us, if you plead guilty, then as prosecutors, we have the leeway to combine those 71 acts into one. So you're facing maximum 5 years in prison. That's if the judge really goes at it, and this is your first offense, so the judge will almost never give you the max. And because you're pleading guilty, we'll go to bat for you, and we'll tell the judge to give you the low end of the guidelines. So maybe you'll get a year, maybe you'll get just probation. So what do you want? You want to fight us? And oh, by the way, do you have $300K? Because that's what you need to hire a good lawyer, to take this to court. So, which I did not, and neither did Alex. So, of course, we didn't really have much of an option. We both pled guilty. Efraim fought them for like a little bit, for maybe 6 months or something, and then he realized he was going to lose. And so eventually he pled guilty too. Ralph decided to take it all the way to court, all the way to trial. And his first trial, so that's why from the point where the New York Times published the article until the point where I was sentenced was about 3 years. Yeah, I was sentenced in 2011 because they didn't want to sentence me until Ralph's trial was over, because when we pled guilty and we signed a plea agreement, we agreed to be witnesses in the trial if it came to trial. So they didn't want to sentence, so they would have leverage on me to be a witness. They didn't want to sentence me until the trial was over. And so his first trial there was a hung jury because one juror refused to convict him. So they did the whole trial again, and then they convicted him on the second trial. And so that's why it stretched out into 3 years. But because of his trial, we got all the discovery and we found out all that the Army knew about it the whole time, and the State Department knew about it before we even delivered. Actually, Alex actually had met with a guy from the State Department before we had done any of the deliveries, and the guy from the State Department had told him that it was all Chinese. They knew it was Chinese ammo, but that it was probably the best use of the Chinese ammo was to send it to the Afghans. So the State Department was totally cool with it. The Army was totally cool with it. The only thing they weren't cool with it was the New York Times making them look bad. And as soon as the New York Times made them look bad, suddenly they all pretended like they had no idea, and we were thrown under the bus. So Ralph ended up getting sentenced to, I think, 4 years in prison after he lost the trial. I got sentenced to 7 months of house arrest. Alex got sentenced to 5 months of house arrest. I was extremely grateful and relieved. I thought I might be spending years in prison, because I could even in theory I could have gotten at least 5 years. I could have gotten up to 5 years because I pled guilty, and it was really up to the judge. The judge could do whatever the judge wants as far as the sentencing goes. So it doesn't matter what the prosecutors promise you, what the federal agents promise you. They could be your best friend, but the judge is having a bad day, and you're going to be spending a few years in prison. And at that point, my daughter was 3-4 years old. She was about to turn 4, and I was thinking, man, I could miss out a big chunk of my kid growing up. That's something you could never get back. So, It was extremely, extremely stressful, and to put it mildly. So I was very, very relieved when I got sentenced to 7 months of house arrest. I was thrilled. Um, Ephraim probably would have gotten something along that line. If I had to guess, he probably would. This is just a guess. He probably would have done a little bit of prison time, like maybe up to a year or something, because he did plead guilty and he signed the plea agreement, right? Which means that the federal agents were required to tell the judge to go easy on him. But part of the plea agreement is that you can commit no more crimes before you get sentenced. Because how are the agents going to tell the judge to go easy on you because you're a reformed good citizen now if you're committing a second crime? So if you commit another crime, you invalidate the plea agreement, and then they're not required to go to bat for you at all. So they told me that I had to get out of the arms business. So it was actually when the New York Times article came out, it was I told you I had started my own company to do the government contracting business, and I had bid on a contract for anti-aircraft ammo. So I think it was 12.7 millimeter ammo. And I had a really good source for this ammo that I knew Efraim did not have, because I had met this particular source at one of the trade shows that we went to, that I had gone by myself without Efraim. So I had this contact that I knew Efraim did not have, and he had an amazing source for this ammo. And so I knew I had the best price, definitely better than Efraim, and Efraim usually had very good prices. So I was very confident I was going to win this contract. And I got a call on, it was March 27th, the day before the New York Times article came out. I got a call from the Army saying that they wanted to start doing the audits on my company for this contract, which meant that I was either in the lead or at least in the top running. And I was set to make about $1 million, $1.5 million from this contract. So, and that was going to be the first major contract that I was going to win on my own, and I was going to make everything. No shenanigans with Efraim. I was like, man, this contract is going to set me up. I'm going to be a millionaire from this one contract. And the next day, the New York Times article comes out, and then I get a call from Wells Fargo, and I had worked out a factoring deal with Wells Fargo. So the way it works is, because the Army, the government tends to pay you 30 days later, but they want all the deliveries within a much shorter time period. You need to be able to finance those deliveries, right? So you could do a deal, what they call a factoring deal with the bank, where you give them the receiving document for each individual delivery, and they will pay you in advance, not in advance, but upon receipt of the document, what the government owes you, minus their own small financing fee. And then you could take that money and roll it into the next shipment, so you don't have to wait 30 days between each shipment. And that was really the only way I was going to be able to finance this deal. I had a investor to do the initial, because I didn't have my own money, but I had the investor to do the initial delivery, but then I was going to use the factoring deal to roll that first delivery into all the other deliveries in order to deliver the whole deal. And when the New York Times article came out, I got a call from Wells Fargo, and they said, we just saw this article about you, and due to the sensitive political nature of this article and the publicity, we're going to have to, unfortunately, withdraw our factoring agreement that we gave you. And because I had no factoring agreement anymore, I was not eligible. I couldn't deliver on the contract, so I had to withdraw from the contract that was going to make me like $1 million. Yeah, so I was like that close. So when the Justice Department just informed us that they were like, we weren't planning on charging you and Alex, but due to the large amount of publicity and backlash that the Army is getting, we unfortunately feel like we can't charge Efraim without charging you guys as well, because you were just so heavily involved. So we're gonna have to charge you guys too. We're so sorry. We didn't want to, but we have to. And I'm like, wow, that really makes me feel a lot better. That you're sorry about that. because the entire time they're like, oh yeah, you guys aren't a target. You don't have to worry about it. Just cooperate. We're not going to charge you, right? Then they're like, oh, we're so sorry. We have to charge you. And they're like, and since you're being charged, you cannot do this business anymore because that will put you at jeopardy as a witness, right? And so I was like, well, it's more important for me not to go to prison than it is to make money. So I quit the business. I went back to university, started studying. I switched from chemistry to mechanical engineering because it was interesting to me. And my lawyer told me, do whatever it is that will make you look good to the judge. So go to school, get a job that makes you look good, right? So I got a job working at a food bank. and I also started doing massages again because I was completely broke and I realized I'm going to have to spend every last penny I have now on lawyers. So obviously I was scared shitless. I was left the arms business, trying to be as good of a citizen as I could to prepare myself for sentencing by the judge. But Efraim just doesn't roll that way, right? They told him the same thing when he pled guilty. You have to get out of the arms business. And he's like, yeah. Sure, I'll get out of the arms business. What he does is he takes his latest lackey, right, the guy he replaced Danny with, right, after he screwed Danny, and he gets that guy to incorporate a company under his name, right? So it's not under Efraim's name, it's under that guy's name, right? So he starts telling that guy, okay, this is how you're going to run your business, right? And so he's pretty much using him as a front. Now, the problem is that Efraim is a control freak, right? So whenever it got to the point of negotiations, Efraim insisted on getting on the phone to negotiate himself. He couldn't let the front guy be the front guy. So whenever it got to the point where they had to do negotiating, Efraim kept on insisting on getting on the phone himself, right? So they were trying to strike a deal, I think it was with Knight Industries, who's based in like the Orlando area. And I think the deal they were going to strike was to import, I think it was some sort of high-capacity magazine from Korea, and which was way cheaper, that they were meant to be manufactured in Korea than in the United States. But they were going to make a deal with Knight to put Knight's like brand on it so that they could charge way more money. And it was going to be a good deal for everybody involved, right? But of course, Efraim had to negotiate hard, and so he gets on the phone, and then eventually the guy he's talking to realizes who he is, and Efraim admits, he's like, yeah, I'm doing. He's like, don't worry about it. I got everything. Everything's under control. You got nothing to worry about. And so the guy he was talking to from Knight Industries probably figured, this guy is probably trying to entrap me into something because to get his own sentence reduced. I mean, he's awaiting sentencing, right? So that's kind of how the whole system works. If you entrap people into committing a crime and turn them over to the government, then the government gives you a little reduction on your sentences in reward. So he figured, well, I'm not going down for this schmuck, right? So he calls up the ATF and he tells the ATF, hey, I got this convicted arms dealer who's trying to do a deal with me. What should I do? The ATF says, that's very interesting. Why don't you introduce one of our undercover agents as your business partner? So he introduces the undercover agent to Efraim as his business partner, and Efraim and the undercover agent tells Efraim, I'm the kind of guy who can only do a deal, over a firm handshake. I gotta, we gotta meet in person to close this deal, right? And Ephraim's like, yeah, I get what you mean. I'm like that kind of guy too, yeah, no problem. He's like, okay, why don't you, drive up to Orlando next weekend and we'll shake on this and we'll close this deal. And he's like, and while you're at it, why don't you bring up a handgun or two? We can go, shoot some rounds. And Ephraim's like, oh, I can't do that. I'm a convicted felon, right? I can't, be in possession of a handgun. And the agent's, come on, nobody's gonna know. It'll just be me and you, buddy. Just bring it. And Ephraim's like, no, man, no, I can't do that. I told you I can't do that. And the agent keeps on pressuring it. Ephraim's like, fine, I'll bring it, right? He drives up. He doesn't bring the gun, right? To his credit, does not bring the gun.
How's that not entrapment?
Oh, it completely is, 100%, right? So, so he goes up to meet the undercover agent. Does not bring his gun. Undercover agent meets him, and he pops open his trunk, and he's like, yeah, I know you didn't bring it, but I brought my gun. Here, check this out. This is the latest handgun, the latest HK on the market. Like, check. And Ephraim's like, oh, I heard about that. I've always wanted to try that. Let me see that thing. Because what can I say? Once a gun runner, always a gun runner. Am I right? And he picks up the gun, and the agent slaps the cuffs on him, and he's like, "You're under arrest, felon in possession of a firearm." And that's how because he wasn't even allowed to leave the Southern District because he was out on bond, awaiting sentencing. And part of the bond agreement was that he couldn't leave the Southern District of Florida. So the agent knew this, and he got him to come to the Central District. So he violated the terms of his bond. So they kept him in county jail, I think, for like almost a year because they denied a bond request because they were like, he violated the last bond. Why should we give him a second one? So he was spent like almost a year in county, which is no fun. And then he could have gotten 5 years for the fraud charge and 10 years for the gun charge. But he hired the best lawyers in Miami. He hired Roy Black's firm. Spent literally $2 million, I heard, on him, and he got it negotiated down to 4. And I think he got out in like 3.5 for like good behavior or drug program, whatever. Yeah, so he ended up serving 3.5 years. But now he's out and about and screwing people left and right, as he does.
So
yeah,
this is kind of funny in like a fucked up dark humor sort of way. But there was a phone call of Ephraim's, I think when he was awaiting sentencing for the second time, that leaked, and you can listen to it on YouTube.
Yeah.
It's kind of a tough listen, but there's one real, like, it's funny in a, again, dark humor way. There's one line in that phone call. So can you talk about that situation and the guy that was going to send the weapons to the FARC? Right.
So there was a guy he was doing business with that had asked him to supply like I think it was AK-47s or something that he admitted was going to go to the FARC, which is a terrorist on the terrorist organizations list. Very illegal to do. And Ephraim hadn't done this, right? But he hadn't done this deal. But once he got into prison, he realized, hey, if I entrap this guy, I could get a reduction on my sentence. So he tried to get his dad to entrap, because he was in prison, so he couldn't do the entrapping, right? So he tried to get his dad to do the entrapping. His dad is like, I know his dad, I know his family. His dad is very, very the opposite of him. He's very mild-mannered, very nice, sweet guy, and you could hear it in the phone call. He's just a very nice guy, and very opposite of Ephraim. And so he was trying to get his dad to do this whole entrapment operation against this guy. And his dad was obviously very hesitant to get involved in this. And he thought from the phone call, it sounds like he's not sure whether what Ephraim's asking him to do is legal or not. It would have been legal, but because it's entrapment, but it actually is legal for him to do that, but his dad wasn't sure about it, and Ephraim gets really frustrated with his dad, and he's like, Dad, you don't understand. For one chicken to leave the coop, another's gotta come in. That's the way it works, okay? Okay? So if I'm gonna get the fuck out of here, someone else is gonna come in. It is a brutal phone call. It's really nasty, but yeah, that phone call was played in court for the judge for the sentencing hearing, because the prosecutors were like, look how he's treating his father.
Oh no,
he's so disrespectful to his own father, and they used that against him in court for the sentencing. Yeah.
And what about Ralph? Because I mean, we've kind of touched on him a couple times
Yeah.
over the course of the interview, but didn't he have like he financed deals for Efraim, which you mentioned, but he financed the Afghan deal 50-50 at one point, or he financed it at one point, so he had an agreement with Efraim to split the profits 50-50.
Yeah.
But didn't Efraim and Danny Dudnik make up a Danny that was a fake investor?
That's true.
How did that happen?
So Ralph, Ephraim's agreement with Ralph was that Ralph would finance the deal as much as with all the money he had, pretty much, which was, I think, was like $1.5 million, and that they would split the profits 50-50. And they had done this sort of deal on their previous contracts. Ralph had financed their in fact, as I said, the first contract that Efraim ever won on his own, Ralph financed it, and Ralph financed it 100%, and they split it 50-50. And so they had this deal that they were going to split the profits on the Afghan deal 50-50. So what Efraim did in order to cut Ralph out was Danny was his number 2 at the time after I left. They made up a fake Danny and said that they need a lot more money to finance this deal, which wasn't true. But the only option that they had for this financing was this fake Danny investor who was demanding an insane amount of the percent, like 90% of the profits. That's what he was demanding. And Efraim really, hates that this is the case, but this is the only option. He doesn't have any other financing alternatives unless Ralph can come up with another, $5 or $10 million, then, which he knew Ralph didn't have, then Danny's the only option. And because Danny's the only option, they need to give Danny the 90% of the profits deal that he's requesting. So he created this whole fake investor and a fake contract with this fake investor to show Ralph so that he could reduce Ralph's take by like 90%. And in the end, he didn't even give Ralph that 10%. He gave him, and not only did he not give him 10% of the profit, he didn't even give Ralph his money back. So he literally stole every last penny that Ralph had. Ralph was like 70-something years old at this point. And he put every penny he had to his name into this contract, and Efraim walked away with it. He walked away with every penny Ralph had. Yeah. He completely bankrupted Ralph. Yeah. Ralph tried to sue him, and, I don't know how that ended up going. There was, the last I heard, it was like Efraim was like, he tries to avoid having where he lives be a matter of public record, because then process servers could serve him with all the lawsuits that people want to sue him with. So Ralph was having a hard time finding where he was living, and so it took him a while to find him. Yeah, so it was a whole thing that Ralph was trying to chase him down for the money, and I don't know what ended up happening with that, but. He bankrupted Ralph, which is really sad. Yeah, he was original investor. If it wasn't for Ralph, Efraim might have not been anywhere. He probably would have lost his first contract and not won another one. But so he really owed his success to Ralph, but he ended up stealing every penny that Ralph had.
And something I talk about on this podcast sometimes is compartmentalizing stress. And so for you, that was. Obviously, it was a very stressful time. You were awaiting trial, 3 years, just sitting on it until Ralph was done. It
was terrible.
You said it was a dark time. You were rolling all your money into the next contract, so you had no money. Your kid was just born at that time. Mm-hmm. How did you deal with the stress at that time? Because that's something that everybody can take something away from.
Sure, it was one of the most stressful periods of my life. I don't think when I went from, because it's. I think emotion is all a relative thing, right? It's I went from thinking I was going to be set for life to about to be completely bankrupt, and with my kid needing me to take care of her and being unable to do that. So that was, going from the top of the world to literally the bottom. It was the emotional roller coaster was massive, and I've always been a pretty positive person. Like I've just naturally an optimistic person, but that was probably the longest period of like depression I'd ever like gone through in my life, and it was eventually I managed to get myself out of it because I was able to kind of find things to hope for. So in the beginning, but this is even before the whole legal problem came about. Um, when I realized that Ephraim wasn't going to pay me, and I realized, well, I know how to do this business, and I kind of like just threw myself into that, and I'm like, well, I can do this business on my own, and I almost did make millions of dollars on my own until the New York Times ruined it, But the New York Times. It's funny because I was a fan of the New York Times before that until they wrote about me. And then I was like, I read the article. I'm like, well, this isn't true. That isn't true. This is very exaggerated. This is, like kind of like mixing up the information. They could have found this out easily enough, but they didn't look into it. There were like 15 different things in the article that were misleading or flat out wrong. And it shook my faith in the New York Times, I got to say. Yeah, so like in the beginning, when it was mostly just like a money issue, I pulled myself out of that by finding hope that I'm going to be able to do this on my own. So yeah, I mean, the first major stressful, well, I would say that it was extremely stressful to work with Efraim in general. I mean, he was just a very stressful person to be around, right? He's always yelling, he's always screaming, always insisting on working crazy long hours. So I had very little of a personal life at the time. Pretty much would fall asleep on his couch most days, wake up, work until I'd pass out on his couch again, and that was like, for weeks on end, right? It was a lot of work. And he's just a very unpleasant person to be around in general. I mean, he was, he didn't really care about like manners in the normal sense. Like, here, I'll give you an example. He would hang out in my, like we actually had, after we won the Afghan contract, we got apartments in the same building, right? And he would come over my place to hang out, and we'd talk business, etc. I remember this one time he was sitting on my couch while we're talking, and like while I'm saying something to him, and he's like looking me right in the eye. And while I'm talking, he starts picking his nose, right? Whatever, but like he's really getting in there. I mean, like he's like, like how most people like pick their nose, so they like rub with the knuckle, or something like that, or maybe a little bit of the thumb, like you try to be discreet, but no, he's like, like all the way fucking in there, like really digging, and not just like a second, like a good like 10, 15 seconds, like really digging around. And I'm like, okay, this is kind of gross, whatever. And then like I'm still talking, looking at him, he's he's looking right in my eye, and without breaking eye contact, he takes his finger out of his nose and he just wipes it on my couch. And I'm like, what the fuck is that? Dude, come on. Why are you wiping your boogers on my fucking couch? It's my fucking couch. I'm looking right at you. What the hell, man? And he's like, oh, come on, man. Don't be a pussy. I'm like, a pussy? I don't want boogers on my couch. How's that being a pussy, you asshole? Like, so he was just that complete lack of consideration, like he just didn't care, like not even a little. Like he doesn't even care to like pretend, like how most people, like they at least pretend like they care to make just interpersonal relations like a little bit smoother, to be polite, right? Politeness is caring, is it pretending to care, right? That's what politeness is, right? He didn't care at all, like not even a little bit. So he was just like that kind of person, call you at 3 a.m, insist you get to the office, always yelling, always screaming, always, like hounding you, So he's just a very stressful person in general to work with. So it was very stressful to work with him. But when when I realized he wasn't going to pay me anything and all my money had been rolled into the next deal, which he now wasn't going to pay me anything. So I had been using my savings to live off this point, and I was kind of coming towards the end of it. And I was not going to have a big payday. And now I've got a lot more expenses because I've got a kid to support. That was a whole new level, because that was like it wasn't just like a stress in the moment kind of thing. Like when I was working with Efraim, I'm like, okay, yeah, this sucks. This is super stressful, but I'm going to push through this. It's like, working out in the gym. Yeah, it's fucking hard, but this is good for me because it's going to pay off later, right? That was kind of like, the mindset. It's going to pay off later. It's hard now, but it's going to pay off later. So muscle through, right? But when I realized I was not going to get anything out of this guy and I'm about to go bankrupt, then it's kind of like a hopelessness thing, right? And that's a way worse kind of stress. Hopelessness is worse than anything. And that leads to depression, and then you lethargic, and that's very, very hard to get out of. And I'm very lucky that I have amazing friends. Not Efraim, obviously, but I have amazing friends, and I'm very close with my family. I'm one of 9 children, so I have a lot of siblings, and we're all very close. And so I really leaned on my family and my friends, and it took a couple weeks to get out of that funk, but eventually I got out of it, and I realized, you know what? Yes, the last year and a half, 2 years were a waste, and I worked my ass off for a really long time, and I'm probably not going to get anything out of that, but I got a whole bunch of knowledge, and I learned how to do a business, and I could start my own business, and maybe I can make it on my own. And so that gave me hope. And so that pulled me out of the hopelessness funk, that hopelessness depression. So, that refocusing of like where I was thinking about, what I was focused on, that's what pulled me out of that. Then when the feds raided the office, it kind of like crashed me down, like, oh shit, I can be going to prison here. And then there was a massive amount of fear, right? But then after the whole talking to the agents and everything, they're like, "Oh, don't worry about it. You're not a target of the investigation." I'm like, "Whew, I'm not the target of the." Okay, I can live my life, right? And I kept on working on my government contracting business. Then the New York Times article comes out, and I realized I went from, oh my God, I'm about to make $1 million here on my own, to, oh crap, I'm about to go to prison here for who knows how long, right? In fact, I might go to prison for the rest of my fucking life, the way they're charging this case. So that took me all the way down into enormous depression. I started looking around and started thinking, man, even the little things that you always take for granted, you can't, that could all be gone. The ability to walk into a store and buy yourself a drink and, eat what you want and go to a restaurant, see your kid, hang out with your friends, play a guitar, watch TV, take a shower by yourself. You know what I mean? Like all those things that you don't think about at all. And then you're looking at decades in prison and you're like, those are all super important things that can be gone. And so that was probably the worst of it. And that was very hard to get over because that lasted a really long time. And eventually, when the government offered me a plea agreement, that helped a little bit, because I realized, okay, it's not going to be the rest of my life. As long as I plead guilty, the max worst case scenario, it's 5 years. And 5 years sucks, but you can recover from that. You can move on with your life, even if you do 5 years in prison. I don't obviously wish it on anyone, but definitely wasn't looking forward to it. But it's survivable, right? I'm gonna miss out a bunch of years of my daughter growing up, but I won't miss out her whole life, right? So that was super, super stressful. And I I dealt with that again by holding out the hope that it wasn't going to be 5 years, that it was going to be, maybe just probation, which luckily it did turn out to be not just probation. It was house arrest, but it's house arrest was heaven compared to prison. So it's all about, I think a good way to deal with stress, it's all about what you're focused on going forward, right? Because it's like, as I said, it's like when you're working out in the gym, you could be super stressed out and it hurts, but that's good for you, right? So that helps, right? Or you're going through a really, really hard time, but you know that there's light at the end of the tunnel. The hardest things to deal with are the things where you don't see the light at the end of the tunnel. You don't see a way through the hard times. That's a very difficult thing to deal with. And I think it's very important to find some sort of light at the end of the tunnel. Even if you can't find the light that you would prefer, find something that you can focus on that is a positive thing. That, I'm not saying that this is going to be that it's an easy thing to do or even necessarily a fully effective thing to do. But if I was going to go for decades in prison, right, I would try to focus on something along the lines of, well, this is going to be an opportunity to do meditation, right? Or something like that. This is going to be an opportunity to get that prison body, right? I mean, if it's decades, then what's the point of it anyway? But yeah, I mean, Matt Cox, who was Efraim's one of Efraim's. I don't think he was his cellmate, but he was in prison with Efraim and ended up writing Efraim's book, which is hilarious, right? Matt Cox, he got sentenced to 25 years for mortgage fraud. He only ended up serving 13 years because he got his conviction overturned, but or he got some sort of legal maneuver that managed to get him out early. But he went from being a major mortgage fraudster, and he reinvented his life in prison as a true crime writer. And so he used that time in prison to pursue an interest which he had for a long time, but had never really given the time to focus on. So I think that that's a very healthy way of dealing with situations like that. I mean, you have to make the best of any situation you're in, right? Because what else are you going to do? Make the worst of it, right? That all you could do is make the best of it. So sometimes the situation you're in is really bad, and it's really hard to see what best is in there. What is the best situation in a really bad situation? I'm not saying every situation that can have a light at the end of the tunnel. Some of them are just horrible, and there's really not much you can do. But most situations, you can find something that you can focus on that can be a source of hope or a source of comfort. And I think that that's really the best way to deal with stress, is to focus on the good parts and try to not think too much about all the bad parts.
That's awesome. I appreciate you sharing that. And because, like I said, that's a very relatable thing in everyday life, and I like that. Just keep putting one foot forward in front of the other,
Yeah.
and find something positive to shift your perspective and focus on. I like it.
Yeah. And most people, they take, I mean, everyone, right? This is a very human thing. You just take things for granted, right? And I forgot who it was I heard this from, but I remember someone told me the story that someone was really depressed, and they said, they asked them, this person was super, super depressed, even suicidal, right? And he said, if, let's say you were blind, right? And you're in the exact same situation you are right now, but you're blind, right? And then suddenly, by some sort of miracle, you're able to see, right? How would you feel in that moment, right? You can see. You were blind before. Now you could see all the amazing. I mean, yeah, everything else in your life is the same, right? All the bad things, all there. But suddenly you can see. You still think you're going to kill yourself right away? I mean, or maybe you'll stick around a little bit and maybe look around, right? Enjoy the sunset, watch a movie, look at a beautiful girl on the beach, all the wonderful things that eyesight gives you, right? All the pleasures, just simple pleasure. Well, you can see. So no matter how bad your life is, it's all about perspective. It's all about where you were before and how you feel about it now. So whenever someone's going through a really hard time, the best thing you could do is try to focus on the things that you still have going well for you, right? And almost everybody has something going well for them, right? Even if it seems to be super small or something that you take for granted, if you realize that you shouldn't be taking it for granted, then you could be able to focus. That's a positive thing, right? I mean, yeah, I'm about to go bankrupt, but I'm still healthy, right? And that rich guy who's in terrible health, he would love to trade places with me, right? That guy may be a billionaire, but he's, in and out of the hospital all day. What he wouldn't give, he would give away all his billions to be healthy again, right? So yeah, I'm broke, but I'm healthy. You focus on that part. Yeah, I'm healthy and I could get rich, right? You always have the hope that things could get better, right? So it's all about focusing on the positive aspects in life and realizing how important it is that you have those things and how you shouldn't take anything for granted, because no matter how bad your life is, it could always get worse, right? This is life's blessing and this is life's curse. Nothing so bad that it couldn't get worse.
Ooh, that rhymes. I like that.
That's how you know it's true, because it rhymes.
Boom. Man, that's awesome. I don't know if you've heard the one, I think I got this from Alex Hormozy, but he's basically just thinks of himself like, looks at his life right now from the lens of his 80-year-old self, or like someone who's on their deathbed. And, say like, oh, I don't want to go to the gym today, and you're thinking about that and like, oh, wow, look at me. Like I'm young. I remember when I was healthy and I could go to the gym and work out. And like that lens is so helpful to just like to center your gratitude, and it just makes your life better.
Absolutely. Gratitude in general. It keeps you humble and it keeps you, centered and balanced. I think and no matter like in both the ups and the downs, I think it's important. It's just as important to have a sense of perspective when everything is going great and to realize that this is not going to last forever. And yeah, you may be making all this money and having all this success and whatever, all the great things in your life happen, all that could go away in an instant. I mean, you could, slip and hit your head on the floor, just like that, just because the floor was a little wet, right? You could, look down at your phone while you're driving, for a text message and accidentally run somebody over, and now you're going to prison. I mean, like all sorts of things can happen to anyone at any time, both good and bad. And so it's very important to always keep yourself centered and have that sense of perspective that no matter how bad it gets, it could always be worse. No matter how good it gets, it could always get worse. So appreciate what you have, hope for the best for the future, work your ass off to make that hope happen, but be humble and realize that no matter what you do, sometimes it's not up to you, and sometimes the universe will throw you a curveball and you just have to deal with it, because that's life.
Awesome. So, how did the movie come about, and what did you think of it?
So the movie well, first of all, best movie ever. I may be a little biased, but just a little, right? I was very happy with the movie, actually. So the way the movie happened was after the New York Times article came out, I had pretty much every journalist in the world ringing my phone trying to, I don't know how they got my number, I guess the journalistic skills, but I had every journalist in the world calling me. My phone was ringing nonstop. And my lawyer told me, don't answer the phone, don't talk to any journalists. As your lawyer, I'd very strongly advise you do not talk to journalists. But then I got a voicemail. They were all leaving voicemails on my phone, and I got a voicemail from a journalist named Guy Lawson, and he was like, "Hey, I'm a journalist from Rolling Stone. We read the article in the New York Times. Would love to write a more in-depth story about, from your perspective and everything. And so, I'm a musician. I've been playing guitar since I was like 15. I've always had dreams of being a rock star. That was actually my goal, was to make enough money from the arms dealing so I could fund a music career. That was my ultimate goal. I always told myself I'm gonna make $5, maybe $10 million, and then I'll use 1 or 2 million and just like make myself an international rock star. I mean, you could do that with $1 million or $2, right? I mean, you could buy yourself your way into being a rock star. I mean, that's what the record companies do, right? They just throw money at advertising and promotion and all that. So that was my like secret plan. Of course, I didn't tell Efraim because he wanted me to work for him forever, and well, apparently not, because he was willing to throw me under the bus the second there was actual money on the line. So I called up the Rolling Stone reporter, Guy Lawson, and I told him, I'm a musician. It's always been my dream to be written about in Rolling Stone, but just not for this. And he goes to me, he's like, hey, listen, I mean, we could throw something about your music in there, you're a musician, you write songs, we can throw something in there. I'll make sure to include it as part of the article. And I told him, my lawyer told me I can't really talk to any journalists. And he's like, listen, I used to be a lawyer too before I got into journalism. Let me talk to your lawyer. And he calls up my lawyer, and he makes an agreement with my lawyer that he's not going to publish anything until all legal jeopardy has passed. That's what he called it. And so my lawyer says, look, he makes that if he's willing to not publish anything until all legal jeopardy is passed, you can talk to him. So I talked to Guy Lawson. He interviewed me a whole bunch. He talked to Alex. He even interviewed Efraim a few times, and Efraim gave him a few interviews, but then decided he wanted to do his own thing, as Efraim does. And to his credit, to Guy Lawson's credit, he did not publish anything until all our legal issues were over, which took 3 years. So he sat on the story for 3 years, from 2008 to 2011. And then in 2011, he published this article called, I think it was called The Arms and the Dudes, or I don't know what the article, that's the book that's the book. I don't remember what he called the article, but you would think I would remember this, right? But so he published this long article, and it was one of the longest articles like Rolling Stone had ever published. It was a really good, I guess, because he kept on investigating over those 3 years. He talked to people on the government side. He did like a real journalistic investigation, deep dive into it, and he got all the documents that were brought up from Discovery and Ralph's trial, and so he really did a lot of digging. And so he kept on digging, and the article kept on expanding. So it was a really long article by the time it got published. And by the time it got published, so Todd Phillips, who is the director of the Hangover movies, he saw the article, and he thought, I can make a kick-ass movie out of this. He was in the middle of filming Hangover 2 at the time. And so he optioned the rights to the article, and he also optioned my life rights, which is they give you like a small amount of money, and they have like a certain amount, like 2-3 years to start production on the movie. And if they start production, then they give you a much larger amount of money. And the life rights means that I just have to cooperate with the screenwriter and pretty much tell him everything I know. But it did not give me any sort of like artistic control whatsoever. They actually didn't even legally, they didn't even have to buy my life rights. They could have made it without paying me a penny and used my real name and everything, because the way it works in the United States, if you are a public figure, right, which all that means is that your name appears in public media, like if some journalist writes an article about you, right, in any newspaper, or if you appear on TV or something, you are now officially a public figure. And because you're a public figure, any art can be made about you using your real name, and they can say anything they want about you, and they don't have to pay you a penny, and they can say anything. That's the law. That's freedom of speech. That law is designed so that politicians can't like crush like dissent, like if like you want to make fun of a politician like through like parody, or you want to make like a biopic, like they don't want powerful people being able to control the narrative. That's what freedom of speech is intended to protect. But because of that, because where do you draw the line of public figure? So right. Where the United States draws the line is if your name has appeared in public media. So because my name was in the New York Times article, they now could make a movie about me using my real name, saying I did whatever they want me to do in the movie. They could say anything they want about me, and they didn't have to pay me a penny, and they could make me look like the worst guy in the world, and there's nothing I could do about it. So I felt pretty lucky that they actually wanted my cooperation. And so they bought my life rights so that I would cooperate and make the movie a little bit more realistic. And so Stephen Chin, who is the screenwriter of the film, he flew into Miami for 2 weeks and did very deep dive interviews with me, recorded everything, and he based the script on that. Todd Phillips was in the middle of making Hangover 2, so it got delayed, and then he decided to make Hangover 3 because that was a sure moneymaker, and then he made War Dogs. That was how the movie happened. And I thought it was actually, so when I heard that Todd Phillips optioned the rights, and when he bought, I was obviously thrilled because I was getting a little bit of money, but I thought he was going to make like another movie like the Hangover movies. So I was like, oh crap, he's going to make me look like an idiot. He's going to make me like a drugged out nut job who's, passing out in Vegas next to a tiger or something. That's what I thought that the movie would end up being like the Hangover movie. So I was pleasantly surprised that the movie actually was like kind of like more of a half serious movie. It was his transition movie because after he made War Dogs, he made Joker, which was like a dead serious drama, sad movie. And so they call War Dogs a dramedy because it's like half drama, half comedy. So that was his transition movie, going from like comedy in The Hangover to drama in Joker. War Dogs was his transition movie. So unfortunately, War Dogs didn't make nearly as much money as either the Hangover movies or Joker. But hey, I can't complain that much.
Well, I loved it. If it's any consolation,
thank you. That means a lot.
Figured it might.
Yeah.
So
I thought it came out good. I was actually very happy with it. I thought that Miles Teller portrayed me in a sympathetic light, gave me great hair, which I appreciate, got the full Hollywood treatment, got a full head of hair, so no complaints there. I do think they made me a little bit more of kind of a loser in the beginning, but I understand why they did that. They wanted it to be a more dramatic arc, like a more of a rags to riches. Mm-hmm. So if it's rags to riches, the more rags it is, the more riches it is, the better the arc is. So I wasn't doing as badly in real life as Miles Teller's doing in the beginning of the movie, but I understand that why they did that. I mean, they also changed a bunch of things. Like they have my girlfriend Anna Darmus in the movie. They have her like me lying to her about like about me being an arms dealer, and in real life, my girlfriend knew about it the whole time, and she had no problem with it whatsoever. She was like, as long as you're bringing in the money. That's all she cared about. So, but they needed like that relationship drama, and, they need the action, and that's why they brought in the Triangle of Death scene. And Triangle of Death scene actually was real, but it happened to Stephen Chin. It didn't happen to us. So the screenwriter who wrote the War Dogs screenplay, he got that job. He got the contract to write this War Dogs screenplay because he had written another screenplay called Iraq before that, which was highly regarded in the industry. It had just never been made into a movie. And that screenplay was about another two American contractors in Iraq who were actually on the ground in Iraq. And Stephen wanted to write the screenplay. He wanted to interview them to write this screenplay, and this was in like 2004, I think. So he tried to go to Baghdad, but there were no commercial flights flying into Baghdad at the time. So he flew into Jordan, and he hired a Jordanian driver to drive him into Baghdad. And his driver stopped in Fallujah to get gas because no one was manning the gas stations.
Yeah.
And then they got shot at by insurgents, and they got saved by the U.S. Army. So that actually did happen, that scene, to Stephen Chen. So when he was writing the screenplay, Todd Phillips, the director, was like, man, these guys are just sitting around the office too much. We need more action. Why don't you put your story in there? So that's how the whole Triangle of Death scene got into the movie.
Wow. That's crazy that actually happened. Like,
Yeah.
Honestly, there's probably no worse place in the entire world during that time to stop for gas at than Fallujah.
Absolutely.
Good Lord.
Yeah.
So how do you view the whole ordeal now? Like, obviously there was a movie made about it.
Yeah.
Like, you're giving interviews all over the place. There was a book written. Like, do you look back on it with like rose-colored glasses or romanticize it at all, or do you still kind of just see it for what it is?
Well, I like to think that I see it for what it is, but I think the point of rose-colored glasses is that you don't know you're wearing them, right? I definitely like to remind myself that it was an unpleasant period of my life. It was not. It was a very stressful period of my life, and I'm glad it's over. I will say that. I do feel very lucky and very fortunate that I got a movie made about me. I mean, how many people can say that, right? Especially live ones. You know, most people who have movies made about them are dead by the time the movie gets made. So to be alive and to have a movie made about me and to be the good guy in the movie, you know, as far as good guys go, as far as that goes, I think I feel very fortunate about it. So I think it's very cool. I didn't end up making any money from the arms business, but I got a Hollywood movie made about me, and so I'm happy about it. I think when all is said and done, I'm glad it happened, and I'm glad it happened that way. I mean, sure, I would have loved to have made many millions of dollars, but I'm even more glad that I didn't go to prison for decades of my life. I think that's much more important than making millions of dollars.
For sure. So, let's get into what you're doing now with War Dogs Academy, which I got to tell you, if I wasn't doing this podcast that consumes every free minute of my time, I would be all over this.
Yeah.
So,
thank you.
how did this come about?
War Dogs Academy.
Right.
Ever since the movie came out, I've always had a lot of people contact me, through my social media accounts, like begging me to teach them how to do government contracting, right? And I get a lot of sob stories, to be honest. You know, I kind of feel bad. You know, like I get people who are like, man, I'm exactly in the position you were at the beginning of the movie. I just had a kid. I just got fired from my job. I'm about to go bankrupt. I'm really desperate. I'm willing to work any amount it's gonna take. I'll work 18-hour days. In fact, you can keep 90% of the profits. Just teach me how to do this. I wanna learn how to do this. And I always feel bad about people, and some people are not that nice about it. Some people are like, yo, teach me, and they get mad when I like ignore them, some people are just, stupid, but I do feel bad for the guys, who are really, wholeheartedly really want to learn how to do this business. And so in 2008, the government said you can't be in this business anymore. And then in 2011, I got an official ban from the judge. So I actually just recently came off the banned list. So now I could do government contracting again. But I haven't been doing it since 2008. So I didn't know how up to date my knowledge was. So I wasn't about to get back into it or teach someone. And anyway, I mean, I don't know if these random people contacting me are serious, because it takes a lot of work. I mean, as I said, it takes a lot of work, a lot of perseverance. You have to deal with a lot of failure. You're going to fail a lot because it's a bidding system. So that means you're going to lose most of the time. That's just the nature of the business. And a lot of people aren't built for that. And, they can't persevere after losing a whole bunch of times in a row, right? And I understand it's a normal human thing. So this business is not for everybody. So around a year ago, I get a message from a guy named Logan. And it was a very different message than the usual message I got. And what he wrote me said, I just wanted to say that about 6 years ago, my partner James and I, we were 21 years old, and we saw War Dogs. And we thought to ourselves, man, if these guys are our age and they pulled it off, why can't we do this? Why can't we get into this business? And so we went totally into it. We learned how to register our company with the government, and how to bid on contracts, and how to find suppliers, and how to do the whole thing. And we lost a whole bunch of bids, and we were almost ready to give up. And then we finally won this big contract, and that was the beginning. And now 6-7 years later, we have a multi-million-dollar government contracting business. And I just wanted to reach out and say thank you for the inspiration, because without War Dogs, we probably would have never done it.
Wow.
And I thought, man, that's fucking awesome. Like, these guys actually did it. They did it. They're not coming begging me to teach them how to do it. They did it on their own. I was super impressed. I mean, I didn't teach myself how to do it. Efraim taught me, and Efraim didn't even teach himself. His uncle taught him. It's not an easy business to learn. So I was super impressed that they managed to pull it off on their own and build a successful business out of nothing, and when they were 21 years old. And so I realized, I told him, a lot of people are asking me to teach them how to do this business, and maybe some of my information might be a little bit out of date, but you guys are currently doing the business right now, so you're as up to date as it gets. So why don't we get together and start something to teach people how to do government contracting? And so that's why we started War Dogs Academy. It's an online course where we break the entire process step by step: how to start a company, how to register the company with the government, how to find suppliers, how to read the solicitations, understand which solicitations you have a chance of winning, how to get the set-asides to give yourself the best chance of winning, how to get the special treatment, which programs are available. So we go through the entire system step by step. We have it in both video format and written format. So, people like different formats to learn in different ways. And we just launched it actually last week. So we just launched it, and it's really taken off. People are really, really interested. And we have quite a few students now. And one of our students has already submitted 5 bids to the government. We're just waiting for him. We think he's going to be the first one to win, just because he's just so he's like a machine, this guy. Yeah, he already submitted 5 bids in I think 2 weeks or something like that. And so yeah, it's really, really taken off. And what we're really excited about, and I told them, when we first were planning on doing this. So one thing people ask me, one thing we see comments online: oh, if this is such a big moneymaker, why are you teaching other people how to do it? Why don't you go make all that money yourself? And I think one thing that people don't realize is that the federal government, puts out 30,000 contracts every single day. Every day for the entire year, 30,000 new contracts every day. So that's more than you could even look at, let alone read in entirety, let alone work on, let alone win. It's as unlimited as it gets. There's massive amounts of contracts being out there, massive amounts of money being spent. And most people, when they go into government contracting, they tend to specialize in some field, right? So we specialized particularly in Warsaw Pact weapons and ammunition. My current partners in War Dogs Academy, they ended up specializing in laundry services. of all things. They just happened to win a contract and they built off that using the past performance to win bigger and bigger contracts. And now they are experts in laundry services. They're providing laundry services for a whole bunch of U.S. bases in Europe. So they fly to Europe, on a regular basis. So they're living the life, They're going to Germany, France, Italy. They're flying around, making millions of dollars, and doing laundry services. And so you can specialize in literally anything. You can specialize in janitorial services or landscaping or food or clothing or fuel or trucks. The government buys literally everything. The government spends $6.7 trillion a year, right? The military budget alone is almost $1 trillion. That is more than the next, I think, 5 or 10 countries combined. It's insane. People don't realize how rich the United States is as a country. I mean, we are the richest country that the world has ever seen, period. Like even when you take into account like all the, the changes in in monetary value, we're richer than the Roman Empire. We're richer than the British Empire. We're richer than anyone. Yeah, the United States is massively, massively, massively wealthy and has the biggest government budget in history. And it's the biggest it's ever been. It's way bigger nowadays than it was when I was working it. So every year it gets bigger and bigger. So the opportunities are enormous. And I told them when we decided to start this, I said, listen, guys, I have a fraud conviction on my record. The last thing I need is another fraud conviction. So we are going to build something real. Right? This cannot be like one of those like get rich quick scams, which there's so many of them out there. Everyone promising you get rich easy. All you have to do these 3 simple steps, except blah, blah, blah. This is not War Dogs Academy. The first thing I tell people, this is not a get rich quick or get rich easy operation. You could get rich quick, but it won't be easy. And it probably won't be quick. Right? I'm not saying it's impossible. I mean, I did win my first contract, I think within like 6 weeks of like starting to work it, and I made $8,000. That's not going to make me rich. But many people don't win any contracts for the first 5-6 months. That's not uncommon. So you have to prepare yourself for the long haul. You can't think, oh, I'm going to go at it and suddenly I'm going to be a millionaire next month. It's usually not how it works. There's going to be a lot of failure, a lot of work. It's a lot of work to get into this business. But it's a real business, and it's a never-ending business because the government isn't going away. So I told them, we are going to be completely 100% straight with everybody. We're not going to portray this as any sort of shady get-rich-quick scheme because it's not, right? And we're going to build it in a way so that our interests are aligned with our students' interests. So, and the way we're doing that is we are building as part of War Dogs Academy, we have 2 other major components besides the main course. We have the main course, which teaches people how to get started. We also have a forum on our website which we call the community, right? Where everyone who has the course can interact with each other, make business connections with each other, because a lot of people work better with a partner, and a lot of people don't have access to a partner. So people can make connections on the forum with each other and make business partnerships, as well as ask questions and for things that they don't understand. Every 2 weeks, we have a Q&A session with me and my 2 partners, as well as a retired contracting officer to give the government's perspective. So we get that inside government knowledge from her. And the thing that we're most excited about is we have a network of investors who are waiting to invest in government contracts. So one of the biggest challenges for someone who's just getting into government contracting is how to finance the deal, right? So Efraim had Ralph, right? Without Ralph, he might not have been successful, right? And you need, for most, not all contracts, but most contracts, you need to have some sort of financing capability, right? Because the government only pays you 30 days after you deliver. And unless you can convince your suppliers to give you the same credit, which very often they won't, you're going to need to be able to float that contract. You're going to be able to pay the supplier in advance and then wait the 30 days after delivery, right? And most people who are getting into this business just don't have that kind of money. Now, the good thing from an investor's perspective is that the government is as a reliable customer as it gets, right? Because in the private industry, you may come across shady characters like Efraim who will just decide not to pay you, and then you have to go sue them and chase them for the money, right? Or you may deal with a company who, before they pay you, they go bankrupt and they just don't have the money to pay you, and then you're kind of out of luck, and you have to go through the bankruptcy courts and hope you get a fraction of what they owe you, when they're doing the restructuring, right? The government is the one that prints the money. So they're never going to run out of money, right? And if they do, then we're all in trouble, and it doesn't matter what business you're in, right? So it's as safe an investment as it gets. As long as you deliver what the government has contracted you to deliver, they will pay you 100% of the time. So from an investor's perspective, it's a very safe investment as long as you do your due diligence beforehand. So through our network, through my partner's business, and they have a network of investors. I've also met a whole bunch of investors doing these podcasts because when I do these podcasts, I oftentimes have an investor, like a lot of investors contact me on social media, and they'll be like, oh, I want to be part of the investor pool. So any investors out there who want to be part of it, feel free to reach out. We already have a whole bunch, but what we think we're going to do is we're going to do kind of like a reverse bidding system, so investors could bid on contracts to fund. And so that is something that someone just starting out on their own, they just don't have access to. So, and of course, we as the creators of the marketplace, we're going to take a certain percentage for ourselves. So we plan to make a lot more money off of financing our students' contracts than off the course itself. Because you can win up to $250,000 of contracts with zero experience. That's the threshold. Up to $250,000, they don't even ask for past performance the vast majority of the time. So you can be a brand new to the business, have zero experience under your belt, and you could win a $250,000 contract. And most contracts tend to be between 5 and 20% profit margin, depending on the contract, depending on the size, depending on your knowledge of the industry and what you think your competitors are building, and how well you negotiate afterwards to increase your margins and all that stuff. So it usually varies between 5 and 20%. So you can make on a $250,000 contract, you can make $50,000 in profit, right? And if you need to fund that, we're going to make a lot more money off of funding that contract, even if it's just one contract, than what that student paid for the course. So our interests are aligned to get our students to be as successful as possible, because the more contracts that our students win, the more we get to fund, the more money we're going to make off funding their contract. We want to be an incubator of government contracting companies. That's the goal of War Dogs Academy. So people can go to wardogsacademy.com and check it out. We're also on all social media, just War Dogs Academy. And we post, little clips and stuff like that. You can get a little preview of what it's like. And very, very excited. It's really taken off. A lot of people are very interested in it. And we've already have quite a bunch of students already, and we just launched a few days ago.
Wow. That's epic. Congrats, man.
Yeah,
it sounds like you guys are doing it the right way, too.
Yeah, thank you. That's what... I can't go to prison, man.
Yeah.
It's got to be the right way.
You're staring down that barrel once. So.
I'm never doing it again. I'll tell you that. It's not. No amount of money in the world is worth it. It's just
I don't blame you.
It's not worth it.
I don't blame you.
Yeah.
So last thing here, I'm just curious, like what just thinking about the wars in Ukraine and Israel, like what are there contracts being posted on, what is it, sam.gov now?
Yeah, sam.gov.
Like what impact is there to contracts being posted here in America?
Well, the United States is I think the biggest, definitely of military equipment, the biggest funder of Ukraine. I think maybe in total Europe might be funding more, but I think more of their money's going towards humanitarian assistance or, financial assistance. But yeah, definitely of military equipment, I think the United States is by far the biggest funder. And we just passed that $60 billion bill for Ukraine. The vast majority of that money is going to be going towards American companies and American manufacturers, because the way they do it is the United States, the military, when they want to provide Ukraine with military equipment, guns, ammo, whatever, they give them what the U.S. military has in stock now, and then they order more for themselves, right, to replenish their stocks. So that means that $60 billion that got passed for Ukraine, there's going to be $60 billion more of contracts going out there on SAM.gov. And it's not just military stuff. I mean, they provide all sorts of support services. They provide food and clothing and transportation services. And there's a whole ecosystem of services around the military-industrial complex that need to be provided besides the actual weapons. I mean, yes, soldiers need weapons and ammo, but they also need clothing. They also need food. They need fuel for the truck. They need the truck itself, right? They need all these things. They need internet services. They need everything. They need security services. So it's going to be the amount of business that is going to be going through the federal system is going to be just significantly more as these crises play out. It is, I don't know how to put this, but like it's the fortunate yet unfortunate thing. Fortunate for people in the business, unfortunate for the world, that war is very profitable. And I would say crises in general, not necessarily just wars, but like, for example, the COVID pandemic, a lot of people got very, very rich off that, providing face masks and gloves and sanitizer. People made a lot of money selling all those things to the government as well as to the private industry. But that crisis was an enormous opportunity, business opportunity. So every crisis is an opportunity for somebody. And when you're selling to the government deals with crises by spending money. So anytime there's a crisis, if you're in the government contracting field, you don't go, oh crap, there's something going wrong. You're like, yes, something's going wrong. And that's a little bit heartless to say in the case of wars and things like that. And I'm not saying that you should be happy that there are wars or horrible things going around the world. But as far as its effect on the business, it's a positive effect on the business. That's the nature of the business.
So last question. You seem like an introspective guy, especially based on some of the things that we covered. But when, people think about like the meaning of life, right? They think about like happiness is the word that's thrown around a lot. But for you, like what are the metrics that you measure your life success by? Like, is it fulfillment, or what comes to mind for you? And what does it all mean?
What does it all mean? Right. That's the age-old question. What does it all mean? Well, meaning is an explanation that you have about the world or about your situation, right? So by definition, meaning is individual, right? It's what you find meaning in. It's not that something means something. It's that you find meaning in that thing, right? So it's not like, the meaning of life is to help other people, right? It's you find meaning in helping other people, right? So, and people find meaning in different things. So, I think that for myself, I try to to give equal amounts of effort to every aspect of my life, right? So I try not to focus on one aspect. Like I try not to laser focus on work, or laser focus on, on health or laser focused on family, because you need all those things. I think to have a good, healthy life, you need to be balanced. You need to have success in your work. You have to have good relationships with your family. You need to take care of yourself. You need to eat well. You need to exercise. You need to sleep well. You need to find things that you enjoy doing, activities that you enjoy doing. Those are all important things. And I think they're all equally important, because if you're lacking in any aspect of your life, you're going to be unhappy, right? You're going to find there's going to be something missing. So it's about balancing all those things. And everybody has their own personal balance, right? Some people focus more on one aspect and other people focus on another aspect. Now, that's not to say that any person's strategy is right or wrong. I think that life is something that is ongoing, right? You never reach anywhere. You're always just going. You're always, moving forward in your life. You never arrive anywhere. You may reach milestones, but okay, and once you reach that milestone's over. Where's the next milestone? It's to be too super cliche, life is a journey, not a destination, right? Now, the important thing is that you are balancing all the different aspects of your life to have an overall healthy life. And we all work in our lives on a what's the term I'm looking for? Life is a balancing act, right? And I think people tend to focus on one aspect of their life to the detriment of others until it becomes kind of like an emergency situation, and then they kind of overcorrect and go focus on that other thing, and then they realize they're neglecting the other aspects of their life because they're focusing on, and then they kind of go back and forth, right? And the hope is that eventually that zigzagging motion leads you in the general up direction of your general life improving, right? So I think if you're doing life right, if you're living life right, you are learning how much effort you need to give different aspects of your life to maintain your life's health as a whole, right? I think happiness in general is where you think that you could have been and should have been versus where you think you are. Right. And if you think that you could have been way better, you should be way better, and then you're unhappy because you're like, I should be doing better than this. Right. But if you're like, man, I'm doing so much better than I thought I could have been, then you're thrilled because, and you could be in any sort of situation, but it's really the expectations versus the reality, which is where happiness comes from, right? As long as your expectations are low and reality is higher, then it doesn't have to be low expectations, but the relative expectations versus the reality, then you're going to be happy. And that's why gratitude is so central to happiness, because gratitude makes you realize all the things that you take for granted. And that puts your expectations, you're like, yeah, I may not be the richest guy or may not have as much money as I want, but I'm relatively healthy. I have good friends. I have a great family. And even if you don't have those things, well, I know people who are way worse than me. I could be as bad as those people, right? There's always someone worse off than you. I mean, just look around the world, right? I mean, like half the world doesn't even have access to food on a regular basis. Just having access to food is an enormous blessing and something that we completely take for granted, and something that historically is an outlier. I mean, for most of history, famine has been a very common thing, and we just take it for granted that we don't even have to go hungry. Most people in our modern world have never had to deal with hunger, right? Because we live in such a world of plenty, but because we grow up in it, we just completely take it for granted. So I think gratitude is an enormous component of happiness, but I think that aspirations are the other side of that as well. You have to balance appreciating what you have while still wanting more. Because if you just appreciate what you have, you may decline, right? Because you're like, oh, everything's great. Because life is never static. You never stay in one place. It's like your health, right? You're either working out and getting stronger, or you're not working out and you're getting weaker. You never stay the same, right? That's not how life works. So the same thing with your career, the same thing with your personal life. You're either building those interpersonal connections with your friends and your family, or they're withering away. It all depends on how much time and effort you put into it. The same thing with your business. You're either growing your business, or it's going to eventually peter out and decay, right? There's no standing still. So it's all about getting yourself in the right direction and being satisfied that you are doing your best in pointing your life in the right direction. Because even if you come across challenges and you have things that go bad, and they always will, right? Life is never a series of victories for anybody. No matter how lucky you are, you're always going to have some tragedy, some failure in your life. As long as you realize that you have the long-term perspective and you're pointing your life in the right direction, I think that is the secret to happiness and the secret to success and the secret to a good life.
I love it. Love it. So, you told people where they can find War Dogs Academy. Where can they find you? Do you have personal social media and stuff?
So David Packouz, that's a Packouz. I'm sure they'll see the spelling in your podcast title. It's an unusual name, Latvian, but yeah. So just David Packouz on all social media, except for TikTok, which is David M Packouz. But I'm almost never on TikTok. But yeah, I'm on most social media. From David Packouz. I would say I'm probably most active on Instagram. But yeah, I've got like a little YouTube channel just for fun. Nothing too serious. And I'm on, X/Twitter occasionally, but not that much. But yeah, I would say Instagram is probably my most active social media that I use.
Cool, man.
David Packouz.
Yeah. Oh man, this was awesome. I appreciate you doing this.
My pleasure.
And it's a cool little thing for me. And I tend not to talk on these things. Mm-hmm. I tend to make it about the guest. But you were one of the very first people that I reached out to.
No way.
Before I even started this thing, and I remember calling you, and I was like, hey, David, I have this podcast, but it's not started yet. And you're like, yeah, okay, why don't you send me something I can look at, and then we'll talk one day. So it's cool to have you sitting here, man.
Yeah,
I appreciate you coming out here from Florida.
Yeah, my pleasure.
And it's awesome. I wish you all the best.
Thank you. Likewise.
Awesome. Thank you, brother.
Yeah, my pleasure.
What's up, guys? Thank you so much for taking the time to watch the interview. If you got anything out of this video at all, please like the video, leave me a comment, tell me what you thought of the video, tell me who you'd like to see on the show. I really appreciate the support. It goes a long way on these platforms, as you guys know. Most importantly, I have some excellent interviews coming up in the future that I'm really, really excited about. So please subscribe to the channel so you don't miss any of them. But that's it. Thank you for your support. I really appreciate it, and hope to see you again soon.